My son and I had been living in a rusted 2008 Honda Accord for 21 days. My late wife, his brother Julian, laughed when he kicked us out of the house I had lived in for 10 years. He looked at me with those cold blue eyes and said, "Go back to the gutter, Deshaun. You do not belong in a mansion." He thought he had won. He thought he had erased me. But Julian made one fatal mistake. He never checked the deed to the 12-unit luxury building his company uses as its headquarters. He did not know that the homeless old man sleeping in a parking lot was actually his landlord. But before I tell you how I brought a billionaire family to their knees using nothing but a signature and some grit, hit that subscribe button. And tell me in the comments, have you ever been underestimated by people who thought they were better than you? The digital clock on the dashboard blinked 2:14 a.m. It was a cruel neon green that seemed to mock me in the darkness. Outside the windows of my cramping sedan, the Boston winter was howling like a wounded animal. The glass was covered in a thick layer of frost that looked like lace but felt like death. I could see my own breath inside the car, puffing out in small gray clouds every time I exhaled. But the cold was not what scared me. I am 70 years old. I spent 40 years working construction on high-rises when the wind off the Atlantic would cut through 3 layers of wool. I know cold. What scared me was the sound coming from the back seat. It was the sound of my 10-year-old son Leo trying to stop his teeth from chattering because he did not want me to worry. I reached back, my joints popping with that familiar arthritis pain that feels like broken glass in your elbows. I adjusted the blanket over him. It was a thin wool thing, the only one we managed to grab before we were thrown out. "Dad," Leo whispered. His voice was small, shaky. "Are we going to start the engine again? It is really cold, really." I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned the color of ash. I looked at the gas gauge. The needle was buried below the E line. It had been there since yesterday afternoon. If I started the car to run the heater, we would burn the last fumes. If we burned the last fumes, we would be stranded here in this Walmart parking lot when the sun came up. And if we were stranded, the towing company would take the car. And if they took the car, we would be on the sidewalk. "Not yet, son," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, deep and calm, the way a father's voice should be. "We have to save the gas for morning. Just curl up tight. Imagine we are camping. Remember when Mom took us to the Berkshires?" I saw him nod in the rearview mirror, but we both knew I was lying. This was not camping. This was survival. And I was failing at it. Suddenly, a blinding white light flooded the car. I squinted instinctively, shielding my eyes. A heavy fist rapped against the driver's side window. Bang, bang, bang. It was not a rhythmic knock. It was the knock of authority. I rolled the window down just 2 inches. The blast of freezing air hit me in the face, instantly numbing my nose. A flashlight beam danced around the messy interior of my car, illuminating the empty wrappers, the piles of clothes, and my terrified son's face. "License and registration," the voice barked. "Officer." I started keeping my hands visible on the wheel. "I am just resting my eyes. We are moving along shortly." The officer lowered the light. He was young, maybe 25. He looked at me, a 70-year-old black man with gray stubble and tired eyes, and then he looked at the boy in the back. His expression softened, but only a fraction. "Look, Pops, you cannot sleep here. Store manager called it in. Private property. You have got 5 minutes to clear out or I have to write you up. And if I write you up, I have to call child services for the kid. You understand? Child services." The threat hung in the frozen air like a guillotine blade. "I understand," I said. My voice was low. "Thank you, officer." He walked back to his cruiser, the lights swirling red and blue against the snowbanks. I turned the key. The engine sputtered, coughed, and whined. My heart stopped beating for a second. "Please, not now. Do not die on me now." I turned it again. The engine roared to life, a sickly rattling sound, but it was running. I put it in gear and crept out of the lot, seeking the shadows of a side street where we might disappear for a few more hours. As I drove, the rhythm of the windshield wipers took me back. It took me back 3 weeks. To the day my life fell off a cliff. It was the day of Sarah's funeral, my wife. The only woman who ever looked past my calloused hands and saw my soul. The funeral had been at the Preston family estate, a sprawling Gothic mansion that smelled of old money and judgment. I was standing by the mahogany coffin, fixing the ribbon on Sarah's flowers, when I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was not a comforting hand. It was heavy, possessive. I turned around to see Julian Preston. Sarah is older brother. He was 50 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than I used to make in a year. He was sipping a scotch, his face flushed with alcohol and arrogance. Touching scene. Deshaun Julian said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. You really played the part of the grieving widower well. I brushed his hand off my shoulder. I am grieving Julian. She was my wife for 12 years. Julian laughed. A short, sharp bark of a laugh. She was your meal ticket, Deshaun. Let us be honest. My sister had a thing for charity projects. She liked the idea of rescuing the rough blue-collar worker. It made her feel noble, but she is gone now, and the show is over. I felt the heat rising in my neck. What do you want, Julian? I want you out, he said, his smile vanishing instantly. Tonight, the estate belongs to the family trust. You are not family, you never were. You were just a guest who overstayed his welcome. This is my home, I said, stepping closer to him, towering over him despite my age. Sarah and I lived here. My son grew up here. Your son Julian sneered, looking at Leo, who was sitting quietly on a bench across the room. That boy is a reminder of Sarah's bad judgment. I have already spoken to the lawyers. The prenuptial agreement you signed states that upon Sarah's death without a surviving spouse named in the trust, the property reverts to the Preston estate. I stared at him. I had signed papers years ago. Yes, I trusted Sarah. She told me not to worry about the details, that she would handle everything. Had she forgotten? You have 1 hour, Julian said, checking his Rolex. Anything left in the house after that belongs to me. And Deshaun, if you try to take anything valuable, anything that looks like it belongs to a Preston, I will have you arrested for theft so fast your head will spin. I wanted to hit him. Lord knows I wanted to smash his perfect teeth down his throat. My hands clenched into fists, the same hands that had bent steel and poured concrete. I could have broken him in half, but I looked at Leo. He was watching us, his eyes wide with fear. If I went to jail, Leo would be alone with these wolves. So I swallowed my pride. It tasted like bile. I went upstairs, grabbed 2 duffel bags, and stuffed them with Leo's clothes and my work boots. We left the mansion while the guests were still eating shrimp cocktails. That was 3 weeks ago. Now back in the car, the gas light flickered and died. The engine cut out. We were on a dark industrial street lined with closed warehouses. Silence rushed back into the car, heavy and suffocating. Dad Leo whispered from the back. Did we stop? Yes, son, I said, rubbing my face. We are safe here. Go back to sleep. I checked my pockets. I pulled out my wallet and counted by the light of the street lamp. $3.42. That was it. That was my net worth. A lifetime of hard work, of building foundations for other people, and I did not have a roof over my own head. I looked at my hands in the dim light. They were scarred, rough, trembling slightly. I felt a single tear, hot and angry, slide down my cheek. I angrily wiped it away. Men like me do not cry. We fix things. But I did not know how to fix this. I closed my eyes, leaning my head back against the freezing headrest. I prayed, not for a miracle, just for a chance, just for one opening. Suddenly, headlights washed over us again. My stomach dropped. The police. They found us. They were going to take Leo. This was it. I sat up straight, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I watched the rearview mirror, but the car behind us was not a police cruiser. It was a sleek black Mercedes sedan. It moved silently like a shark in dark water. It pulled up alongside my rusted Honda and stopped. The window rolled down. I did not move. I locked my doors. In this neighborhood at 2 a.m., a luxury car usually meant drug dealers or trouble. I reached under my seat, gripping the tire iron I kept there. A woman stepped out of the Mercedes. She was not a dealer. She was dressed in a sharp gray trench coat, her hair pulled back in a tight professional bun. She held a leather briefcase against her chest as if it contained nuclear codes. She walked straight toward my door, ignoring the slush soaking her high heels. She knocked 3 times. Precise. Urgent. I lowered my window just a crack, gripping the tire iron tighter. "Who are you?" I growled. "Mr. Carter," she said. Her voice was calm but shivering slightly from the cold. "Mr. Deshaun." "Carter." I did not answer. She leaned closer, her breath fogging in the air. "My name is Elena Rodriguez. I was your wife. Sarah is private attorney. Not the family lawyer, her private one." I narrowed my eyes. "Sarah never mentioned you. She hired me 6 months ago secretly, she said, glancing around the desolate street. She knew her family would try to do this to you. She knew they would try to erase you. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. Mr. Carter, you are not homeless, she said, intense urgency in her eyes. I have been looking for you for 3 weeks. Please unlock the door. You need to see this. I looked at the envelope. Then I looked at her eyes. They were not the eyes of someone playing a trick. They were the eyes of someone holding a grenade. I unlocked the door. She handed me the envelope. I tore it open, my stiff fingers struggling with the clasp. Inside was a deed, a property deed. I turned on the dome light. My eyes scanned the legal jargon until they landed on the address. 1400 Commonwealth Avenue. I gasped. That is the Preston Tower. The woman nodded, a small, tight smile appearing on her face. The headquarters. Julian Preston sits in the penthouse of that building every day. But he does not own it, Mr. Carter. Sarah bought the building through a shell company 10 years ago using her inheritance from her grandmother, and she left it to you. I stared at the paper. The letters swam before my eyes. The lawyer leaned in closer. They kicked you out of their house, Deshawn, but tomorrow morning you have the legal right to evict them from their own company. I looked back at Leo sleeping under the thin blanket. Then I looked at the lawyer. How do we do it? I asked. She smiled, and this time it was a dangerous smile. First we need gas, then we need a suit, and then we are going to crash a party. The neon sign of Joe's all-night diner buzzed with a sound that reminded me of a trapped fly. It was the most beautiful sound I had heard in weeks because it meant warmth. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee, frying bacon, and floor wax. To a man who had been freezing in a parking lot, that smell was perfume. My son Leo sat across from me in the red vinyl booth. He was devouring a plate of pancakes and scrambled eggs like he had not eaten in days because, truthfully, he hadn't. Every bite he took chipped away a little piece of my heart. A father is supposed to provide. A father is supposed to be the wall that stands between his child and the hunger of the world. I had been a crumbling wall. Ms. Rodriguez sat next to Leo, sipping black coffee. She had not touched her food. Her eyes were fixed on me, sharp and calculating. She looked like a woman who played chess while the rest of the world was playing checkers. You are wondering why Sarah never told you, she said. Her voice was low, cutting through the clatter of silverware from the kitchen. I wrapped my hands around a ceramic mug, letting the heat seep into my aching joints. Sarah told me everything I said. We did not have secrets. She had one, Rodriguez corrected gently. She knew her family, Deshawn. She knew them better than you did. You saw their insults and their cold shoulders. Sarah saw their books. She saw how they moved money, how they hid assets, and how they destroyed anyone who tried to take a slice of their pie. I looked down into my coffee. Sarah was the softest soul I ever knew. But she was a Preston by blood. She had grown up in a shark tank. About 6 months ago, Rodriguez continued, she came to my office. She was sick then, but she was hiding it well. She told me that if anything happened to her, Julian and his parents would try to erase you. She used that exact word. Erase. She knew they viewed you as a stain on their pristine white lineage. I tightened my grip on the mug. They did exactly what she said. Rodriguez reached into her briefcase again. She pulled out a photograph. It was old, grainy, and black and white. It showed a dilapidated brick building with boarded-up windows. Do you recognize this? She asked. I squinted at the photo. A memory surfaced from the deep fog of 20 years ago. It was back when I was still running my contracting crew before my knees gave out. Sarah had asked me to help her with a project. A charity thing, she said. That is the old textile warehouse on 4th Street, I said. I spent a whole summer fixing the foundation of that place. The roof was caving in. The basement was flooded. Sarah said she wanted to turn it into low-income housing for single mothers. Rodriguez nodded. And she did. But she did not do it through the Preston Family Trust. She bought the building under a shell corporation called Leo Properties. She named it after the son she was hoping to have one day. I looked at Leo, who was wiping syrup off his chin. He was named after a building. Or, rather, the building was the promise of him. That building is not just a warehouse anymore, Rodriguez said, leaning in. The city council just approved the new subway line extension. The station is going to be built right across the street. Developers are buying up everything in that zip code. That crumbling brick building you fixed up 20 years ago is now sitting on a piece of land worth $4 million. I choked on my coffee. $4 million. The number hung in the air. It was a number that could change everything. It was a number that could send Leo to college. It was a number that could buy us a home where no one could ever kick us out again. "But there is a catch," Rodriguez said. Her tone dropped an octave, and the hope that had just flared in my chest flickered. "There is always a catch," I said bitterly. "The building is technically yours. Sarah left the shares of the shell company to you in this separate will. However, because the original purchase funds 20 years ago came from a joint account she shared with her brother Julian, effectively has a lien on the property." I slammed the mug down. Coffee sloshed over the rim. "So it belongs to him." "No," Rodriguez said, firm and steady. "It belongs to you. But to clear the title and sell it or manage it, you need a release form. You need Julian Preston to sign a document stating he has no interest in the property." I laughed, a dry, humorless sound that frightened Leo. "Julian sign a paper giving me $4 million. Ms. Rodriguez, you are a smart lady, but you do not know that man. He would burn that money in a barrel before he let me have a dime of it." "I know," Rodriguez said. "That is why we are not going to tell him what it is worth." I looked at her confused. "To Julian, that building is just a rotting liability on the outskirts of town," she explained. "He thinks it is full of non-paying tenants and structural violations. He thinks it is a headache. In the official family ledgers, it is listed as a distressed asset with zero value. He does not know about the subway extension yet. The announcement does not go public until next week." She slid a single piece of paper across the table. "This is a standard quitclaim deed," she said. "It basically says, I, Julian Preston, release all rights to this worthless property, so I do not have to deal with the taxes or the maintenance. If you can get him to sign this thinking he is dumping a burden onto you, the building is yours. Free and clear." I stared at the paper. It looked so simple. Just black ink on white paper. But it was a trap. "You want me to walk back into that house?" I whispered. "You want me to walk back to the man who spat in my face yesterday and ask him for a favor?" "It is the only way," Deshaun Rodriguez said. "If I go as a lawyer, he will get suspicious. He will have his legal team look at it, and they will find the subway plans. It has to be you. It has to be the defeated, broken old man begging for scraps. He has to believe you are taking this building because you have nowhere else to go." I looked at Leo. He had fallen asleep in the booth, his head resting on his jacket. He looked so small, so vulnerable. He trusted me to protect him. I thought about the cold car. I thought about the police officer. I thought about the way Julian had looked at me at the funeral like I was something he scraped off his shoe. "If I go back there," I said, my voice trembling with a rage I was trying hard to suppress, "he is going to humiliate me. He is going to make me crawl." Rodriguez looked at me with eyes that were hard as flint. Let him laugh. Let him think he is winning. Because the moment that ink hits the paper, you own the ground he is standing on." I reached out and took the paper. My hand was shaking not from age but from adrenaline. I was 70 years old. I had a bad heart and bad knees. But inside I felt something waking up. It was the same fire I felt when I was 20, pouring concrete 16 hours a day to prove I was worth a damn. I stood up. I buttoned my old worn-out coat. "Watch my son," I told Rodriguez. "Where are you going?" she asked, though she already knew. "I am going to get my property back," I said. I walked out of the diner and into the freezing pre-dawn darkness. The wind hit me like a physical blow, but I did not feel it. I had a mission. I got back into my rusted Honda. The engine whined in protest, but it started. I pointed the car toward the wealthy side of town, toward the iron gates and the manicured lawns, toward the Preston estate. I was driving into the lion's den. I had no weapon. I had no money. All I had was a piece of paper and the desperate hope that Julian Preston's arrogance was bigger than his brain. As I drove, I rehearsed what I would say. I had to play the part. I had to be the broken man he wanted to see. I had to swallow my pride until I choked on it. I pulled up to the massive wrought iron gates of the estate just as the sun was starting to bleed gray light over the horizon. The security guard, a man I had known for 10 years, stepped out of the booth. He looked at my car and then at me. "Mr. Carter," he said, his face unreadable, "I have orders not to let you in." I rolled down the window. "Please, Thomas," I said, injecting a quiver into my voice. "I just need to speak to Julian for 5 minutes. I left my medicine. Please, I have nowhere else to go." Thomas hesitated. He looked at the house, then back at me. He saw a pathetic old man. He did not see the wolf underneath the sheepskin. "Make it quick, Deshawn," he muttered, and pressed the button to open the gate. The heavy iron gate swung open with a groan. I drove up the long driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs like a sledgehammer. I was back. And this time I was not leaving without a fight. I watched Ms. Rodriguez's black Mercedes disappear around the corner with my son inside. Leo looked back at me through the rear window, his small hand pressed against the glass. That image, his terrified face fading into the morning traffic, felt like a physical blow to my gut. Trusting a lawyer I had just met with the most precious thing in my life was a gamble, but I had no choice. This war I was about to fight was no place for a 10-year-old boy. I walked 3 blocks to a gas station. The attendant, a teenager with headphones around his neck, watched me suspiciously as I marched straight to the bathroom. I locked the door and looked at myself in the cracked mirror. The man staring back was a stranger. My eyes were red-rimmed from lack of sleep. My gray beard was unruly. My skin looked ashen, worn down by the stress of survival. I looked exactly like what Julian said I was, a gutter rat. I stripped off my work shirt and washed myself in the sink. The water was freezing and the soap was that pink industrial sludge that smells like fake cherries and bleach. I scrubbed until my skin was raw. I had to scrub away the smell of the car. I had to scrub away the scent of poverty. From my duffel bag, I pulled out my suit. It was a charcoal gray wool suit, 20 years old. I had bought it for my wedding to Sarah. It used to fit me like armor. Now it hung loose around my shoulders. I had lost 15 pounds in the last 3 weeks. I tightened my belt to the last notch and splashed cold water on my face one last time. "You are not a beggar," I whispered to the reflection. "You are a shark. Do not forget that." I stepped out of the bathroom and walked toward the financial district. The wind was biting, cutting right through the wool, but I kept my head high. I focused on the rhythm of my footsteps. Left, right, just like on the job site. Keep moving until the work is done. The Preston Enterprises Tower rose up in front of me like a monument to greed. 50 stories of glass and steel reflecting the cold winter sun. I had built the foundation for the annex building next door. I knew the bones of this place better than the people sitting in the corner offices. I pushed through the revolving doors and the warmth of the lobby hit me. It smelled of expensive espresso and leather. "Deshawn." The voice came from the security desk. I turned to see Mike, a burly guard with thick shoulders. My heart sank. I knew Mike. 10 years ago, he was a kid on my crew. I had taught him how to pour concrete. I had vouched for him when he got in trouble with the union. "Hello, Mike," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Mike did not smile. He looked down at his monitor, his face flushing red. He tapped his earpiece. "Deshawn, look, I cannot let you up. Mr. Preston sent a memo this morning. Your name is on the blacklist. Hard ban. If you show up, I am supposed to call the police." I walked up to the desk. I placed my hands on the marble countertop. They were rough, scarred hands contrasting with the polished stone. "Mike," I said softly, "remember when you broke your leg on the job site? Who drove you to the hospital? Who made sure you got your workers' compensation?" Mike looked up, pain in his eyes. "Deshawn, please, do not make me do this. I have a mortgage. I have a baby on the way. Julian will fire me if I let you pass." I leaned in closer. "I am not here to cause trouble, Mike. I am here to surrender. I am leaving town. I just need to sign one paper so I can get my pension released. If I do not see him, I starve." "Is that what you want?" Mike hesitated. He looked at the elevator bank, then back at me. He typed something into his computer. "I will call his assistant." Mike whispered, "But if he says no, you have to leave." I nodded. I waited. Those 2 minutes were the longest of my life. People in expensive suits walked past me, giving me a wide berth, wrinkling their noses. They saw an old black man in an ill-fitting suit standing in their pristine lobby, and they assumed I was lost. They did not know I was about to own the building. "Go," Mike said suddenly, not looking at me. "Penthouse. He says you have 5 minutes. Thank you, Mike." I stepped into the elevator. As the numbers climbed, my ears popped. Floor 10, floor 20, floor 40. With every floor, my anger grew hot in my chest. This was the tower Sarah's family built, but it was built on the backs of men like me. The elevator doors opened directly into the reception area of the penthouse. It was all white marble and glass. Julian's assistant, a young woman who looked like she was carved out of ice, pointed to the double doors without saying a word. I pushed the doors open. Julian was standing by the window looking out over the city. He did not turn around when I entered. He was finishing a phone call. Sell the tech stocks. Buy more into the subway expansion zone. Yes, I know. Just do it. He hung up and slowly turned to face me. He looked perfect. His navy suit was tailored to the millimeter. His hair was slicked back. He looked like a king in his castle. "Well, look who it is," Julian said, a smirk playing on his lips. "The prodigal brother-in-law. I thought I smelled something musty. Did you sleep in a dumpster last night, Deshawn?" I stood in the middle of the room. I did not sit. I did not speak. I just held the envelope Ms. Rodriguez had given me. "Cat got your tongue." Julian walked over to his massive oak desk and sat down, leaning back in his leather chair. "Why are you here? I told you the house is gone. The bank accounts are frozen. There is nothing for you to scavenge." I cleared my throat. My voice sounded raspier than usual. "I am leaving, Julian. I am taking the boy and going down south. I have family in Alabama." Julian raised an eyebrow. "Alabama? How fitting. You should have gone there 20 years ago. So why are you here bothering me?" "I need money for gas," I said. The lie tasted like ash in my mouth. "And I need you to sign a waiver." A waiver. I stepped forward and placed the document on his desk. My hands were shaking, and I prayed he interpreted it as fear, not rage. "It is for social services," I lied. "To get assistance in Alabama to get food stamps for Leo, I need proof that I have no claim to Sarah's estate. I need proof that I am destitute, that I own nothing. If you sign this, it proves I have walked away from everything." Julian laughed. It was a cruel, high-pitched sound. "So you want me to certify that you are a loser? That you are walking away with nothing?" "Yes," I whispered. I lowered my head. I let my shoulders slump. I made myself look small. Julian opened the drawer of his desk. He pulled out a money clip. He peeled off 2 $100 bills. He crumpled them into a ball and threw them. They hit my chest and fell to the floor. "There is your gas money," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. $200. That is exactly what you are worth, Deshawn. Pick it up." The room went silent. The only sound was the humming of the air conditioner. I looked at the green balls of paper on the expensive Persian rug. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to lunge across the desk. I wanted to wrap my hands around his throat. I wanted to smash his arrogance into the floor. I was a man who had built skyscrapers. I was a man who had raised a son. I did not bow to anyone. But then I thought of Leo. I thought of the cold car. I thought of the deed in the envelope. The lion attacks. The fox waits. Slowly, painfully, I bent down. My knees cracked loudly in the silent office. I reached out and picked up the bills. I smoothed them out on my thigh. I placed them in my pocket. "Thank you, Julian," I said. I did not look up. Julian chuckled. He was enjoying this. He was feeding on my humiliation. It was the best meal he had eaten all week. "You are pathetic," he said. "Give me the damn paper. I want you out of my city by noon." He reached for the document. It was the quitclaim deed Ms. Rodriguez had prepared. It was standard legal boilerplate. It listed Property 45, Old Textile Warehouse, and stated that Julian Preston released all interest and claims to the property and its holding company. Julian pulled a gold fountain pen from his pocket. He uncapped it. He looked at the paper. "Wait," he muttered. My heart stopped. The blood froze in my veins. He paused, the pen hovering inches above the signature line. His eyes narrowed as he scanned the text. "Property 45, he asked, looking up at me. "What is this? I thought this was a welfare waiver." I forced myself to breathe. My brain scrambled for an answer. It is the old shed," I stammered. "The one Sarah bought years ago to store old furniture. The social worker said I have to declare all assets. Since my name was on the repair permits, they think I own it. I just need you to say you do not want it so they do not count it against my poverty level. It is full of rats anyway." Julian looked at me, then back at the paper. He tapped the pen against his chin. "I remember that dump," he said slowly. "Sarah wasted so much money on your little pet projects." He looked at the document again. His eyes drifted to the bottom of the page, to the fine print where the legal description of the lot was written. I held my breath. If he read the lot number, if he recognized the zoning code, if he knew that old textile warehouse was the same address as the new subway station. He squinted. He leaned closer to the paper. "Deshawn," he said, his voice dropping, "why does this date say 2004? He was not looking at the zoning. He was looking at the date of the original purchase. I do not know," I said, sweat forming on my forehead. "I just brought what the social worker gave me." Julian stared at the paper for another second. The silence stretched tight as a piano wire. He looked at the fine print. He looked at the description of the land boundaries. Then slowly he looked up at me. A strange look crossed his face. Was it suspicion or was it something else? He slowly lowered the pen to the paper, but he did not sign. He tapped the nib against the desk, leaving a small blot of ink. "You are in a big hurry to leave town, aren't you, Deshawn?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said. Julian smiled, but it wasn't the arrogant smile from before. It was a cold, calculating smile. He pushed the paper back toward me, unsigned. "I think I will have my legal team look at this first," he said, "just to be safe." My world collapsed. If his lawyers saw this, it was over. "No, Julian, please," I begged, letting the desperation bleed into my voice. "If I do not get this to the office by 5 p.m., they cut off my application. We will starve. Just sign it. It is a worthless shed." "You said it yourself." Julian watched me beg. He loved it. He loved the power. He picked up the pen again. He twirled it in his fingers. Tell you what he said. Beg. "What? Get on your knees," he said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Get on your knees and beg me to sign it. Ask me for my charity." I looked at the floor. I looked at the man who had tormented my wife and my son. I lowered myself onto one knee. My bad knee screamed in protest. "Please, Julian," I said, staring at the floor. "Please sign the paper." Julian threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, victorious laugh. "Pathetic," he said. "Absolutely pathetic." He slammed the pen down onto the paper. He scribbled his signature, aggressively tearing the paper slightly. He threw the document at me. "Get out," he sneered. "And take your trash son with you." I grabbed the paper. I stood up. I put it in my pocket next to the $200. "Thank you, Julian," I said. I turned and walked to the door. I did not look back. I walked to the elevator. The doors closed. As the elevator began to descend, I leaned against the metal wall. I pulled out the paper. I looked at the signature. It was messy, angry, and beautiful. It was done. But as the elevator hit the lobby, I realized something. Julian had signed it too easily after the begging. He was arrogant, but he wasn't stupid. I walked out of the building, the wind hitting my face. I needed to get to the courthouse to file this immediately. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Ms. Rodriguez. "Deshawn," she said, her voice tight. "Where are you?" "I just got the signature," I said, walking toward my car. "I am heading to you." "Do not go to the car," she screamed. "What?" "Why I am tracking the police scanner," she said. "Julian just called the precinct. He reported a theft. He told them you stole a bearer bond from his desk while he was distracted. He set you up, Deshawn. Police are surrounding the building right now." I looked up. 2 police cruisers were screeching around the corner, lights flashing, heading straight for me. Julian had signed the paper, but he had no intention of letting me walk away with it. The silence in the penthouse office was thick enough to choke on. Julian was holding the pen, hovering over the signature line, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the document. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. He was looking at the dates. He was looking at the fine print. If he read one line further, if he saw the zoning code attached to the appendix, he would know. He would know that the crumbling warehouse was actually the golden ticket to his subway expansion project. I was still on one knee, my bad leg screaming in agony, my head bowed in false submission. I held my breath, praying to every god I knew. "Just sign it, you arrogant vulture. Just sign it." Julian opened his mouth to speak. He was going to ask about the appendix. I could feel it. Suddenly, the double doors swung open with a violent crash. "Julian." The voice was shrill and demanding. It pierced the tension like a glass shard. I did not look up, but I knew that perfume. It was Chanel No. 5 applied so heavily it smelled like chemical warfare. It was Tiffany Preston, Julian's wife, the woman who had looked at my son at the funeral and asked if we had checked him for lice before letting him sit on her sofa. Tiffany marched into the room, the heels of her Italian leather boots clicking sharply against the marble floor. She was a whirlwind of expensive fabric and nervous energy. "We are late, Julian," she snapped, ignoring me completely. "The senator is already at the brunch. If we are not there in 20 minutes, we lose the table by the window." "Do you know how hard I worked to get that reservation?" Julian looked up, the suspicion fading from his face, replaced by annoyance. "I am busy, Tiffany," he said, gesturing vaguely at me with the pen. "I am dealing with family matters." Tiffany finally looked down. She saw me kneeling on the floor, clutching my old hat, wearing a suit that was 3 sizes too big. Her lip curled in genuine disgust. She did not see a human being. She saw a stain on her carpet. "Oh God," she said, taking a step back as if poverty was contagious. "Is that Deshawn? Why is he here?" "I thought we got rid of him." "Julian, did you let him in?" "He smells like old soup." I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. Old soup. I wanted to stand up and tell her that I smelled like hard work and survival. I wanted to tell her that while she was picking out handbags, I was keeping my son warm with my own body heat. But I stayed down. "The fox waits. He is begging Tiffany." Julian said, a smirk returning to his face. "He wants a waiver so he can get welfare in Alabama." "Well, hurry up then," Tiffany shouted, checking her diamond-encrusted watch. "Just give him whatever he wants and let's go. The car is downstairs. If we are late, I am going to tell your father that you were wasting time with your sister's charity case." That was the trigger. The mention of his father. Julian was terrified of the old man. He lived his whole life trying to prove he was not a failure. Julian looked at Tiffany, then looked at me, then looked at the clock. The suspicion about the document evaporated. He did not have time to read the fine print. He did not have time to call his legal team. He just wanted to get his nagging wife out of his ear and get to his fancy brunch. "Fine," Julian grunted. He looked down at me one last time. His eyes were cold, dead things. "You are lucky my wife is in a hurry, Deshawn. Otherwise I would have made you crawl out of here." He pressed the gold nib of the fountain pen onto the paper. The scratching sound was the most beautiful music I had ever heard. He scribbled his signature, aggressively tearing the fiber of the paper slightly. It was a violent, angry signature. "There," he said. He did not hand the paper back to me. He held it up. He looked at it, then he looked at me. A sudden cruel idea sparked in his eyes. He wanted one last victory, one last way to mark his territory. He brought the paper close to his face, and then he spat on it. A glob of saliva landed right next to his signature. "Keep it as a souvenir," he said, dropping the wet paper onto the floor in front of me. "Do not ever let me see your face in Boston again. If you come within 10 miles of my building, I will have you arrested for harassment." Tiffany laughed. It was a harsh, ugly sound. "Come on, Julian. He needs to go dumpster diving before the sun goes down." She grabbed Julian's arm and pulled him toward the door. They walked out without looking back. I stayed on the floor until the heavy oak doors clicked shut. Silence returned to the room. Slowly I reached out. My hand was steady now. I picked up the paper. I wiped Julian's spit off with the sleeve of my jacket. I did not care. That spit was worth $4 million. That signature was my freedom. I stood up. My knee popped a sharp bolt of pain shooting up my leg, but I did not wince. I felt light. The heavy weight that had been crushing my chest for 3 weeks was gone. I looked around the penthouse office. I looked at the expensive art on the walls, the leather furniture, the view of the city that Julian thought he owned. "Enjoy it while it lasts. Julian," I whispered to the empty room, because the clock just started ticking. I turned and walked out. I did not walk like an old man anymore. I did not shuffle. I walked with the stride of a foreman walking onto a job site. I walked with the rhythm of a man who knows exactly where he is going. The elevator ride down felt different. On the way up, it had been a metal coffin. On the way down, it was a chariot. When the doors opened in the lobby, Mike, the security guard, was waiting. He looked nervous. He had clearly been worrying about me. "Deshawn?" he asked, stepping forward. "Are you okay? Did he hurt you?" I stopped. I looked at Mike. I placed a hand on his shoulder. "I am better than okay, Mike." Mike looked confused. He looked at the envelope in my hand. "You got the signature?" "I got it," I said. And Mike, "Yeah, dust off your resume, son. There are going to be some changes in management around here very soon, and I am going to need a head of security I can trust." I left Mike standing there, mouth open, and pushed through the revolving doors. The cold Boston air hit me, but this time it felt bracing, invigorating. It felt like the air of possibility. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the burner phone Ms. Rodriguez had given me. I dialed the number. She picked up on the first ring. Deshawn. Is everything all right? Her voice was tight with worry. I walked toward my rusted Honda, ignoring the stares of the businessmen in their long coats. The fish has bitten, I said. There was a pause on the other end. Then I heard a long exhale. Did he read the appendix? No, I said, climbing into the driver's seat. His wife came in. She was more worried about a mimosa than her husband's assets. He signed the release. The building is ours. Ms. Rodriguez let out a short, sharp laugh. Unbelievable. You did it, Deshawn. I am filing the electronic transfer right now. By the time he finishes his brunch, the title will be in your name. Where are you going? I started the engine. It roared to life, sounding less like a dying animal and more like a war cry. I am going to see my property, I said. I want to see what Sarah left us. I want to see where Leo is going to grow up. I will meet you there in an hour, Rodriguez said. Be careful, Deshawn. This is just the beginning. When Julian finds out, he is going to come for you with everything he has. Let him come, I said, and hung up. I drove south. I left the gleaming skyscrapers of the financial district behind and headed toward the industrial zone. This was my part of town. The part where the streets had potholes, where the buildings were brick and mortar, not glass and lies. As I drove, I allowed myself to dream. I imagined the old textile warehouse. I remembered fixing the roof 20 years ago. It had good bones. Solid brick walls, high ceilings, big windows. I could picture Leo running down the hallways. I could picture a warm kitchen. I could picture a Christmas tree. For the first time since Sarah died, I allowed myself to cry. But they were not tears of despair. They were tears of relief. I turned onto 4th Street. The neighborhood was changing. I could see the construction cranes in the distance, the signs of the new subway line that Rodriguez had told me about. This place was about to boom. Sarah had been a visionary. I drove down the street looking for number 45. There it was. The red brick building stood at the end of the block. But something was wrong. My stomach dropped. I slammed on the brakes. The building was surrounded by a chain-link fence. A tall, aggressive fence topped with barbed wire. But that was not the worst part. Parked right in front of the building were 2 massive yellow bulldozers. Their engines were silent, but they looked like sleeping beasts waiting to feed. And there, hanging on the fence, was a massive sign. It was bright orange and black. Property of Preston Development Group. Underneath that, in bold red letters, were words that made my blood run cold. Demolition scheduled Monday, 8:00 a.m. Monday. That was tomorrow. I sat in my car staring at the sign. I held the deed in my hand. The paper said the building was mine, but the bulldozers said it was gone. Julian had signed the release because he thought the building was worthless, but he had also scheduled it to be destroyed to clear the land for something else. He did not need to own the building to knock it down if he had a city permit claiming it was a safety hazard. I got out of the car. I walked up to the fence. I gripped the cold metal wire until it cut into my palms. Inside the yard, I saw movement. Men in hard hats were walking around. They were prepping the site. They were setting explosives. "Hey!" I shouted. "Hey, you!" One of the men turned around. He was holding a clipboard. "Get back!" he yelled. "This is a restricted area. Demolition zone. I own this building!" I screamed, waving the paper. "You cannot touch it." The man laughed. He shook his head and turned back to his crew. "Go tell it to the city pops. We have a permit signed by Julian Preston himself. This pile of bricks is coming down tomorrow morning, whether you like it or not." I stood there small against the massive machines. I had the law on my side, but they had the dynamite. I looked up at the 3rd floor window. For a second, I thought I saw a curtain move. Wait, I squinted. I saw it again. A shadow. A small human shadow moving behind the dirty glass. Mrs. Rodriguez said the building was empty. Julian said it was abandoned, but someone was in there. My phone buzzed again. It was Rodriguez. "Deshawn, I just checked the city records," she said, her voice panicked. "Julian filed a demolition permit 2 days ago. He claimed the building is structurally unsound and uninhabited." "It is not uninhabited," I whispered, staring at the window. What Rodriguez asked. There are people inside, I said, my voice rising. I just saw someone. Rodriguez. There are people living in there. Get out of there! Deshawn, she screamed. If there are squatters, Julian won't care. He will bulldoze it with them inside and call it an accident. He has done it before. I looked at the bulldozers. I looked at the sign. I looked at the shadow in the window. I hung up the phone. I did not get back in the car. I grabbed my tire iron from the back seat. I walked toward the gate lock. I had spent my whole life building things. I was not going to let them tear this down. Not today. Not while I was still breathing. The yellow monster roared to life. The massive blade of the bulldozer lifted into the air, blocking out the sun, ready to crush the brick wall of the building that now belonged to me. The ground beneath my feet trembled, vibrating through the soles of my worn-out boots. It was a feeling I knew well. I had spent 40 years on construction sites. I knew the rhythm of destruction. But this time the destruction was personal. I did not run. I did not hide. I gripped the tire iron in my hand, not as a weapon to strike a man, but as a tool to strike metal. I walked straight toward the lead machine. The dust swirled around me, choking and thick, but I kept my eyes locked on the operator in the glass cab. I swung the iron. Clang. The sound rang out sharp and clear over the diesel engine. I hit the steel track of the bulldozer again. Clang. The operator looked down, startled. He killed the engine. The sudden silence was heavy, broken only by the distant wail of city traffic. "Are you crazy, old man?" the operator shouted, opening his door. "You want to get buried under a ton of bricks?" I walked around to the front of the machine. The foreman was running toward me now, his face purple with rage. He was a big man, thick-necked, holding a clipboard like a shield. "Get the hell off this site," the foreman screamed. "I am calling the cops. We are on a schedule." I planted my feet. I stood tall. My back hurt, my knees ached, but I let the spirit of every foreman I had ever worked for take over my voice. "Let me see your abatement permit," I bellowed. The authority in my voice stopped him in his tracks. "What?" the foreman stammered. "You heard me," I said, pointing the tire iron at the building. "This is a pre-1950s structure. That means asbestos in the insulation and lead paint on the windowsills. You cannot touch a single brick without a hazardous material survey and a wet demolition permit. Where are your water trucks? Where are your hazmat suits?" The foreman looked at the building, then back at me. He shifted his weight. "Look, buddy. Mr. Preston said the building is clean. We have a green light to Mr. Preston is a suit." I cut him off. "He does not know a load-bearing wall from a load of laundry. If you drop that bucket on this wall, you release a cloud of asbestos dust into this neighborhood. That is an OSHA violation, section 1926.1101. That is a $10,000 fine per day and loss of your license. Do you want to lose your union card today, son?" The other workers had gathered around. They were looking at the foreman. They knew I was right. They were blue-collar men just like I used to be. They knew the rules. They did not want to breathe poison just because some billionaire was in a hurry. The foreman cursed under his breath. He pulled out his radio. "Hold the line," he muttered to his crew. "Do not drop anything until I verify the paperwork." He walked away to make a call. I knew exactly who he was calling. I did not wait. I turned and walked toward the chain-link fence. The padlock was heavy, but I knew how to pick a lock with a tension wrench, or in this case, twist a weak link until it snapped. I was inside the perimeter. I walked up the concrete steps to the front door. The property of Preston sign was nailed across the wood. I ripped it down. The wood splintered and the sign clattered to the ground. I pushed the door open. I expected darkness. I expected rats. I expected the smell of rot and abandonment that Julian had described. Instead, I smelled curry. I smelled bleach. I heard the sound of a television playing cartoons. I walked into the hallway. The floor was swept clean. There were drawings taped to the walls, children's drawings of suns and flowers. "Hello," I called out. A door on the first floor creaked open. An old woman peered out. She was African American, her hair wrapped in a colorful scarf, her face lined with years of hardship, but her eyes bright and alert. She held a broom like a spear. "Who are you?" she asked. "You with the bank? You with the demolition men?" "We aren't leaving. We paid our rent." I lowered the tire iron. "No, ma'am. I am not with the bank. I am Sarah's husband." The woman's eyes widened. She dropped the broom. She stepped into the hallway. "Mr. Carter," she whispered. "Miss Sarah's Deshawn." "Yes," I said. She let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. "Lord have mercy. We thought you were dead. We heard Ms. Sarah passed, and then the letters came saying we had to get out. They said the building was condemned." Doors began to open all along the hallway. People stepped out. There was a young Hispanic mother holding a baby. There was a middle-aged white man in a wheelchair. There was a family of Somali refugees who looked at me with terrified eyes. 12 units, 12 families. They were not squatters. They were tenants. Sarah never told me, I whispered, looking at their faces. The old woman walked up to me. She took my rough hand in hers. Her hands were warm. "Ms. Sarah was an angel," she said. "She charged us $300 a month. She said everyone deserves a roof. She told us about you. She said her husband was a strong man, a builder. She said if anything ever happened to her, you would know what to do." I felt a lump in my throat the size of a brick. Sarah had hidden this place not because she was ashamed of it, but to protect it. She knew that if Julian found out she was running a low-income sanctuary on prime real estate, he would have shut it down years ago. She had kept it off the books to keep them safe, and she had left it to me because she knew I was the only one who would fight for them. The building shook as the bulldozers outside revved their engines again. The baby started to cry. The man in the wheelchair looked at the ceiling with fear. "They are going to tear it down," the young mother said, tears streaming down her face. "We have nowhere to go. The shelters are full." I looked at them. I looked at the peeling paint that Sarah had tried to fix. I looked at the life they had built here. "No," I said. My voice was low, but it echoed in the hallway. I walked to the center of the group. I stood on the bottom step of the staircase so they could all see me. "My name is Deshawn Carter," I said, my voice rising. "And as of 1 hour ago, I am the owner of this building." A murmur went through the crowd. Hope, fragile and desperate, flickered in their eyes. "Those men outside work for Julian Preston," I continued. "He thinks this building is empty trash. He thinks you are invisible. He wants to knock this place down to build a subway station so he can get richer." I held up the deed. It was crumpled, stained with Julian's spit, but it was legal. "This paper says he is wrong. This is private property. And you are my tenants. And as long as I am standing, no machine is touching these walls." "Thank you, Jesus," the old woman shouted, raising her hands. "But listen to me," I yelled over the celebration. "The war is not over. It is just starting. Julian Preston is not going to give up because of a piece of paper. He is going to come at us with lawyers. He is going to come at us with lies. He is going to try to starve us out. Are you ready to fight for your home?" "Yes," the man in the wheelchair shouted. "Then barricade the doors." I ordered, slipping back into my role as foreman. "I want mattresses against the ground floor windows. I want every bathtub filled with water in case they cut the pipes. If anyone tries to enter, you do not open the door unless you hear my voice. Do you understand?" We moved like an army. I directed the men to secure the back entrance. I helped the mothers move furniture to block the hallway. For the first time in weeks, I did not feel like a homeless old man. I felt like a general. I walked back out the front door to face the foreman. I was ready to tell him to pack up his machines. But the foreman was gone. In his place were 6 police cruisers. They screeched to a halt, blocking the street. The doors flew open and officers poured out hands on their holsters. They were not smiling. They were not here to check permits. Behind them, a black limousine pulled up. The window rolled down. It was not Julian. Julian was too cowardly to come down to the dirt. It was his lawyer, a man named Sterling, whom I had seen at the funeral. He looked at me with a reptilian smile. "That is him," Sterling shouted, pointing a manicured finger at me. "That is the man who broke into the facility. He is inciting a riot. He has taken hostages inside a condemned building." Deshawn Carter, a police officer, shouted through a megaphone, "Put down the weapon and place your hands on your head." I looked at the tire iron in my hand. I dropped it. It clattered on the concrete. "I am the owner," I yelled back. "I have the deed. We have a report of an armed intruder threatening demolition workers and claiming false ownership," the officer shouted. "Get on the ground. Now." I looked back at the building. I saw the faces of the tenants peeking through the boarded-up windows. They were watching. If I fought the police, I would be shot or beaten and Julian would win. If I surrendered, I might live to fight in court. I slowly got down on my knees. The cold concrete bit into my skin. I laced my heavy fingers behind my head. 2 officers rushed me. They slammed me face down into the dirt. I tasted grit and oil. They twisted my arms behind my back, wrenching my arthritic shoulders until I groaned in pain. The handcuffs clicked tight, biting into my wrists. "You are making a mistake," I shouted as they hauled me up. "This is my property. Save it for the judge, dirtbag," the officer hissed in my ear. As they shoved me into the back of the cruiser, I saw Sterling step out of the limo. He walked over to the foreman. I saw him hand the foreman a thick envelope. Then he pointed at the building. "Tear it down," I heard Sterling say. "Do it now, before he makes bail." I slammed my body against the window of the police car. "No, no, there are people in there." The siren wailed, drowning out my screams. As the car pulled away, I watched in horror. The foreman waved his hand. The operator climbed back into the bulldozer. The engine roared, the black smoke plumed into the sky, and the machine began to move toward the front door, where 12 families were hiding behind mattresses, trusting a man who was now being dragged away in chains. The concrete bench in the holding cell was cold enough to seep through my thin suit trousers and settle deep into my bones. The air smelled of ammonia, old sweat, and despair. I had been sitting there for 20 hours. My wrists were bruised from the handcuffs. My shoulder, the one I had injured years ago hauling steel beams, was throbbing with a dull, persistent ache. But physical pain was an old friend. I could handle that. What I could not handle was the silence. Every hour that ticked by on the wall clock outside the bars was an hour my son was alone. I had told the police that Leo was with Ms. Rodriguez, but the fear gnawed at me like a rat. What if they took him? What if Julian used his connections to find him before I got out? I closed my eyes and tried to picture Leo's face. I tried to remember the way he laughed when I made shadow puppets on the wall of our car. That memory was my anchor. Suddenly, the heavy steel door at the end of the corridor clanked open. Footsteps echoed on the concrete floor. Not the heavy, rhythmic tread of a guard. These were expensive shoes. Leather on stone. Click, click, click. I opened my eyes. Julian Preston stood on the other side of the bars. He looked impeccable as always. His suit was crisp, his hair perfect. He looked like he had just stepped out of a boardroom, not into a city jail. He held a handkerchief to his nose, grimacing at the smell. "Hello, Deshawn," he said. His voice was smooth like oil on water. Comfortable. I did not stand up. I did not give him the satisfaction. I stayed seated on the bench, leaning back against the cinder block wall, watching him with hooded eyes. "What do you want, Julian?" I asked. My voice was rough from dehydration. "I came to bring you some news," he said, smiling. "A little reality check." He signaled to the guard down the hall, who nodded and stepped away, giving us privacy. Julian gripped the bars with his manicured hands. "You made quite a scene yesterday," he said, "claiming you own my building, waving around a forged deed. My lawyers are having a field day with it. They are calling it fraud, trespassing, and endangerment. You are looking at 5 to 10 years, Deshawn, maybe more given your history of aggressive behavior." "I haven't been aggressive since 1985, I said calmly. "And the deed isn't forged. You signed it." Julian laughed. A soft, pitying sound, a signature obtained under duress from a senile old man. No judge will uphold that, especially not Judge Holloway. We play golf on Sundays. He leaned closer, his face pressing between the bars. The smell of his expensive cologne wafted into the cell, masking the stench of bleach. "But that is not why I am here," he whispered. "I am here about the boy." My muscles tensed. I sat up straighter. "Leave Leo out of this." "Oh, I cannot do that," Julian said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "You see, when a parent goes to prison for a felony, the state takes custody of the minor. Child Protective Services is already looking for him. And since I am his closest living relative, well, guess who gets priority?" I stood up then. I walked to the bars. I was 70 years old, but I was 6'2". I looked down at him. "You hate him," I said. "You called him a mongrel. You would never take him in." "True," Julian shrugged. "I do not want him. But Tiffany, she needs help around the house. The maids are so expensive these days. And having a grateful little helper to scrub the floors and wash the cars, it might teach him some discipline. He can sleep in the servants' quarters, or maybe the garage. It is heated mostly." The rage that exploded in my chest was white hot. It was not the anger of a man. It was the instinct of a father. I gripped the bars so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to reach through and snap his neck. "If you touch him," I growled, my voice dropping to a terrifying whisper, "I will kill you." Julian did not flinch. He laughed again. "From inside a prison cell, I don't think so. You are done, Deshawn. You are buried. By tomorrow morning, the building will be rubble, you will be in maximum security, and your son will be polishing my shoes." He turned to walk away. I stood there breathing hard, my heart pounding against my ribs. He had found my breaking point. He knew exactly where to stick the knife. But then the heavy door opened again. "Deshawn Carter," a voice bellowed. It was the desk sergeant. Behind him stood Miss Rodriguez. She looked tired. Her trench coat was rumpled and she was holding a stack of files that looked heavy enough to break a table. But her eyes were blazing. "Open the cell, Sergeant," she commanded. Julian stopped. He turned around confused. "What is this? Who is she?" "She is my lawyer," I said, a small smile touching my lips. Ms. Rodriguez walked past Julian as if he were a piece of furniture. She handed a document to the sergeant. "Habeas corpus petition granted by the state Supreme Court," she said loud and clear. "Immediate release. And this," she held up a second document, thrusting it toward Julian, "is a cease and desist order for the demolition at 45 West 4th Street, signed by the district attorney himself. It turns out, Mr. Preston, that destroying a building with 12 documented tenants inside is considered attempted manslaughter in the first degree." Julian's face went pale. That is ridiculous. The building is empty." "Is it?" Rodriguez challenged. "We have sworn affidavits from 12 families. We have utility bills in their names. We have video evidence of your foreman acknowledging the tenants before he ordered the bulldozers forward." She took a step closer to him. She was half his size, but she looked 10 feet tall. "You tried to bury the evidence, Julian, but you just dug your own grave." Julian looked at the papers, then at me. His composure cracked. His hands shook slightly. "This isn't over," he spat. "I will bury you in litigation for 20 years. You will run out of money before you even get to discovery." I walked out of the open cell door. I rubbed my wrists. I stood next to my lawyer. "I do not need money, Julian," I said. "I have the truth, and right now I have the deed." I snatched the release form from the sergeant's hand. I looked at Julian one last time. "Stay away from my son," I said softly. Julian glared at me, his eyes filled with pure venom. Then he turned and stormed out of the holding area, his footsteps echoing faster and faster like a retreating army. Ms. Rodriguez let out a long breath. She slumped slightly against the wall. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I am now," I said. "Where is Leo?" "He is safe. He is with my mother," she said. "She is making him arepas. He is fine, Deshawn." "Thank you," I said. "I owe you my life." "You owe me a retainer fee once we win this," she joked, though her smile was weak. "Come on, let's get out of here. The smell is making me nauseous." We walked to the front desk to collect my belongings, my wallet still empty, my keys, and my belt. The chief of police was waiting for us at the exit. He was a big man with a red face and a thick mustache. I knew him. Captain O'Malley. He and Julian drank scotch together at the country club. He leaned against the doorframe blocking our path. "Leaving so soon, Carter?" he asked, chewing on a toothpick. "The judge signed the order," Captain Rodriguez said sharply. "Step aside." O'Malley didn't move. He looked at me with eyes that were cold and hard. "You got lucky today, old man," he grunted. "Some fancy lawyer tricks. But let me give you a piece of advice." He took the toothpick out of his mouth and pointed it at my chest. "You are not just fighting Julian Preston. You are fighting the way things work in this town. You are poking a sleeping bear, and when that bear wakes up, it does not just bite, it tears you apart." I put my belt back on. I looked O'Malley in the eye. "Captain," I said, "I have been fighting bears my whole life. Usually they are the ones who end up running." O'Malley chuckled darkly. "We will see. Watch your back, Carter. Accidents happen, especially in condemned buildings." He stepped aside. I pushed open the heavy glass doors and stepped out into the sunlight. It was blindingly bright. The air tasted of exhaust fumes and freedom. I took a deep breath. "What now?" Rodriguez asked, checking her watch. "We stopped the demolition for today, but he will be back tomorrow with a new judge and new lawyers." I looked toward the south side of the city, toward my building, toward my people. "Now," I said, buttoning my jacket. Now we go to war, but we need an army. What kind of army? The kind that doesn't cost money, I said. The kind that is built on sweat and loyalty. Take me to the Union Hall. Rodriguez looked at me confused. The construction union. But you haven't paid dues in 20 years. I smiled. No, but I saved a lot of lives back in the day. It is time to call in some favors. I walked toward her car. The threat from Julian about Leo was still ringing in my ears. He wanted to take my son. He wanted to make him a servant. That thought did not make me afraid anymore. It made me dangerous. As we drove away, I looked in the side mirror. I saw a black SUV pulling out of the alley behind the police station. It was following us. They are tailing us, I said calmly. Rodriguez checked her mirror. Who O'Malley's men, or Julian's private security? Doesn't matter. I leaned back in the seat. Let them follow. I want them to see what happens next, because I was not going to hide anymore. I was going to turn 45 West 4th Street into a fortress. And if Julian wanted it, he was going to have to come through me 12 angry families and every bricklayer in Boston who owed me a favor. The chandeliers in the grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel were brighter than the sun. They cast a golden glow over 300 of Boston's wealthiest citizens, men in tuxedos that cost more than my car and women dripping in diamonds that could feed a small country. The air smelled of expensive perfume, roasted duck, and money. Old money. The kind of money that thinks it can buy anything, including the truth. I stood at the back of the room in the shadows of the velvet curtains. Beside me, Ms. Rodriguez adjusted the lapel of my new suit. It was a dark navy bespoke cut tailored to fit my broad shoulders and the slight stoop in my back. I did not look like the homeless man who had been sleeping in a Honda a week ago. I did not look like the prisoner in the holding cell. I looked like what I was. A man who owned the ground these people wanted to walk on. You ready, Deshawn? Rodriguez whispered. Her eyes were scanning the room, picking out the targets. The bankers, the investors, the city council members. I adjusted my cufflinks. I spent 40 years building foundations, Rodriguez. I know how to spot a crack in the concrete, and tonight we are going to bring the whole house down. On the stage at the front of the room, Julian Preston was holding court. He stood behind a clear podium looking every inch the visionary CEO. A massive screen behind him displayed a 3D rendering of a gleaming glass tower. The words, Preston Plaza. The future of Boston were projected in bold silver letters. Ladies and gentlemen, Julian's voice boomed over the speakers, smooth and confident. For generations, the Preston family has been dedicated to elevating this city. We do not just build buildings, we build legacies. And tonight, I am proud to announce that the Preston Plaza project is fully funded and ready to break ground. Applause rippled through the room. Polite, restrained applause. The sound of people calculating their potential profits. This new development, Julian continued pointing to the screen, will transform the dilapidated industrial district into a hub of commerce and luxury. It will feature high-end retail, a 5-star hotel, and direct access to the new subway line. It is a masterpiece of modern engineering, and it is 100% owned and operated by Preston Development. That was my cue. I stepped out of the shadows. I took a glass of champagne from the tray of a passing waiter. I did not drink it. I just held it. A prop. A weapon of civility. I walked down the center aisle. My footsteps were silent on the plush carpet, but my presence was loud. Heads began to turn. A few people whispered. They recognized me from the news reports, the mugshot that Julian had leaked to the press. But they were confused. The man in the mugshot was a disheveled criminal. The man walking down the aisle was a king. Julian saw me. He froze mid-sentence. His mouth stayed open, but no sound came out. His eyes darted to the security guards standing by the exits, but the guards did not move. Ms. Rodriguez had already shown them the court order. They knew better than to touch me. Julian Tiffany hissed from the front table, "Do something!" But Julian could not do anything. He was paralyzed by the ghost of the man he thought he had buried. I stopped 10 feet from the stage. The room went deadly silent. You could hear the ice melting in the glasses. I raised my glass slightly in a toast. "That is a beautiful rendering, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, deep, and it carried to the back of the room without a microphone. Truly impressive, especially the way the sunlight hits the atrium. Julian gripped the podium. His knuckles were white. "Get out of here, Deshawn. This is a private event. Security." Actually, I said, taking a step closer, it is a shareholder meeting, isn't it? A gathering of the primary investors in the Preston Plaza project. I looked around the room, making eye contact with the men in the front row. I recognized Mr. Sterling, the head of the investment bank. I recognized Councilman Davis. And since I am the owner of the land that this beautiful building is supposed to sit on, I believe that makes me the majority shareholder, or at least the most interested party. A murmur ran through the crowd. It sounded like a swarm of bees. "He is lying," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "He is a squatter, a con artist. He has been arrested for fraud." I reached into my inner jacket pocket. I did not pull out a weapon. I pulled out a folded piece of paper, the copy of the deed Julian had signed, the one with his spit on it. "Mr. Sterling," I said, turning to the banker, "you are financing this project based on the collateral of the land, correct? Block 45, the old textile warehouse district." Sterling, a man with gray hair and a face like a bulldog, stood up. He looked at Julian, then at me. "Yes," he said gruffly. "The prospectus states that Preston Development owns the entire block, free and clear." I smiled. A cold, hard smile. "Then you might want to ask Mr. Preston why he signed a quitclaim deed transferring the heart of that block, specifically the parcel designated for the subway entrance. To me, last week." I held up the paper. "You are selling apartments on my land, Julian," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "You are selling a dream that has no foundation. Without my building, there is no subway access. Without the subway access, there is no zoning permit for the tower. And without the permit, this whole project is just a pretty picture on a screen." The room exploded. People stood up. Voices rose in panic. Investors were pulling out their phones, frantically dialing their analysts. Julian looked like he was going to vomit. He stepped out from behind the podium, sweating profusely under the stage lights. "It is a mistake," he yelled, waving his arms. "It was a clerical error. The document is invalid." "He tricked me." "Tricked you?" I asked, cutting through the noise. "Did I trick you when you spat on the paper, Julian? Did I trick you when you called me a beggar and told me to crawl? Or did you just assume that because I am an old black man with calloused hands, I was too stupid to know the value of dirt?" I turned back to the crowd. "My name is Deshaun Carter. I am a master builder. I know that if you build on a lie, the structure eventually collapses. And right now, ladies and gentlemen, you are standing in a collapse zone." Mr. Sterling walked up to me. He took the paper from my hand. He put on his reading glasses. He scanned the document. Then he looked at the appendix. He looked at the signature. He looked up at Julian on the stage. The look in his eyes was not friendly. It was the look of a man who realized he had almost lost $50 million. Julian Sterling said, his voice quiet but terrifying. "Is this your signature?" Julian stammered. I... He misled me. I didn't read." "Is this your signature?" Sterling roared, slamming the paper against a table. "Yes," Julian shrieked, "but it doesn't matter. We can fight it in court. We can bury him." Sterling turned to his associates. "Pull the funding. Kill the wire transfer. Suspend trading on Preston Development stock. Now! No!" Tiffany screamed, jumping up from her chair. Her face was twisted in ugly rage. "You cannot do this. Do you know who we are? We are the Prestons." Ms. Rodriguez stepped forward then. She stood next to me, small but mighty. "And my client is the legal owner of the Keystone property," she said. "Any attempt to proceed with construction will be met with an immediate injunction. And Mr. Sterling, if your bank continues to back this project knowing the title is in dispute, you will be named as co-conspirators in the fraud lawsuit we are filing tomorrow morning." Sterling looked at Rodriguez. He nodded once. "Respect." He turned his back on Julian. The gala was over. The waiters stopped serving. The music stopped playing. The guests began to stream toward the exits, checking their phones. I heard a ping from a phone nearby, then another, then a chorus of notifications. I looked at a young man standing near me holding a tablet. He was staring at the screen, open-mouthed. "What is it?" I asked. "Preston Development stock," the young man whispered. "It just dropped 12% in 3 minutes. The market is reacting to the rumor of the halted funding. It is a free fall." I looked up at the stage. Julian was sitting on the steps of the podium, his head in his hands. Tiffany was screaming at him, hitting his shoulder with her clutch purse. I felt a hand on my arm. It was Ms. Rodriguez. "We should go," she said softly. "We made our point." I nodded. I placed the champagne glass on a table, unfinished. I walked back up the aisle. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. These people who would not have looked at me on the street were now staring at me with a mixture of fear and awe. I wasn't invisible anymore. As I reached the door, I turned back one last time. Julian lifted his head. Our eyes met across the ruin of his party. He looked small. He looked like a frightened child. But I knew better. A frightened child is dangerous. A wounded animal bites. This wasn't the end. It was just the end of the beginning. I walked out of the ballroom and into the lobby. My heart was pounding, not with fear but with adrenaline. That felt good. Rodriguez said, a small smile playing on her lips. It felt necessary, I corrected. But watch your back, Rodriguez. Julian just lost millions. He is going to come for blood now. And he won't use lawyers next time. I stepped out into the Boston night. It was still cold. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel the chill. I felt the heat of the battle, and I was ready for whatever came next. Because I wasn't just fighting for a building anymore. I was fighting for every person who had ever been told they were worthless by a man in a suit. I was fighting for Leo, and I was winning. The credit card machine let out a sharp, low beep that sounded like a rejection. It was the third time the cashier at the hardware store had swiped my card. The line behind me was growing impatient. I saw a man in a painter's uniform check his watch and sigh. I felt the heat rise up the back of my neck, not from shame, but from a cold realization. "It is declined, sir," the cashier said, handing the card back to me. "It says, card issuer referral. You want to try another one?" I did not have another one. That card was linked to the account Ms. Rodriguez had set up for me using the initial settlement funds from a previous job. It should have had $5,000 on it. I took the card back. My hand was steady. I knew exactly what was happening. This was not a banking error. This was a message. I looked at the cart full of plywood nails and heavy-duty locks. We needed these supplies to secure the building. I reached into my pocket. I pulled out a roll of cash. It was the collection money the 12 families had scraped together that morning. Wrinkled $10 and $20 bills. Money earned from cleaning floors, driving taxis, and washing dishes. It was not much, but it was real. "I will pay cash," I said, counting out the bills on the counter. Julian Preston thought he could starve me out by freezing my assets. He thought that if he cut off the flow of money, I would crawl back into a hole. But Julian forgot one thing. Poor people know how to survive without banks. We have been doing it our whole lives. I drove back to the building with the supplies. The mood in the neighborhood had changed. 2 black SUVs with tinted windows were parked across the street. They were not police cars. They were private security contractors. Mercenaries in cheap suits. As I unloaded the wood from my truck, one of the SUVs blasted its horn. A long, aggressive sound designed to make me jump. I did not flinch. I kept carrying the wood. They started throwing trash over the fence, empty soda cans, fast food wrappers. Then came the rocks. A brick sailed over the chain-link fence and smashed through the window of Unit 1A where the elderly Mrs. Higgins lived. I heard her scream. I dropped the wood and ran inside. Mrs. Higgins was shaking in the hallway, clutching her cat. There was glass everywhere. "He is trying to scare us," she cried, pointing at the shattered window. I looked out at the SUVs. I saw a man in the passenger seat laughing. I grabbed a sheet of the new plywood I had just bought. I called to Marcus, the young father from the 3rd unit. "Grab a drill," I ordered. "We are boarding it up." We worked fast. We covered the broken window. Then we covered the ground floor windows. We turned the building into a fortress, but Julian was just getting started. At sunset, the lights flickered. Then the heaters groaned and died. The building plunged into darkness. The temperature outside was 12 degrees. Inside, the warmth began to bleed away instantly. I went to the basement to check the main breaker. It was intact. I went outside to the alley. The lock on the utility box had been cut. The main power cables had been severed with bolt cutters. This was not a utility shutoff. This was sabotage. I walked back inside. The tenants were gathered in the hallway holding candles and flashlights. I saw the fear in their eyes. They were remembering the shelters. They were remembering the cold nights under bridges. Leo was standing next to me. He was wearing his winter coat and a hat. He looked up at me, and for a second I saw the terrified boy from the car. "Dad," he whispered, "are we going to freeze?" I looked at him. I looked at the families. "No," I said. My voice echoed in the dark stairwell. "Julian thinks he can turn off the lights and we will run away. But he forgot who I am." I turned to the group. I need every extension cord you have, I shouted. I need flashlights, batteries, and duct tape. Mr. Silva, bring your toolbox. Jamal, bring the car battery from your van. I am a general contractor. I have wired skyscrapers. I have built hospitals. A cut wire is not a problem. It is a puzzle. We went to work. We could not reconnect to the main grid without the power company, but we could improvise. We ran a bypass from the emergency generator in the old boiler room which Sarah had installed years ago. It was dusty and out of fuel, but the engine was sound. We siphoned gas from my old Honda. We spliced wires using pocket knives and electrical tape. I was on my knees on the cold concrete of the basement floor, twisting copper wires together, my arthritic fingers aching but moving with muscle memory. Leo was holding the flashlight for me. His hand was shaking slightly. "Hold it steady, son," I said gently. "I am scared, Dad," he admitted. "Why are they doing this?" "Because they are bullies, Leo, and bullies hate it when you do not run." I finished the splice. I looked at the generator. "Stand back," I said. I pulled the starter cord. It sputtered. I pulled again. Nothing. "Come on, old girl," I whispered. "Do it for Sarah." I pulled a third time with everything I had. The engine roared to life. It coughed smoke, then settled into a loud, steady rhythm. Above us, the lights in the hallway flickered on. The heaters hummed back to life. I heard cheering from the floor above. Footsteps running, laughter. I looked at Leo. He was grinning. The fear was gone, replaced by awe. "We did it," he said. "We are not done," I said, wiping grease from my hands. I took him upstairs. We did not stop. We spent the next 4 hours reinforcing the doors. I showed the men how to wedge 2x4s against the door frames so no battering ram could get through. Then I took Leo to the boarded-up window in the hallway. I handed him a hammer. It was heavy, a real framing hammer with a hickory handle. He looked at it like it was a foreign object. "Hold it at the end of the handle," I said, guiding his small hand. "Let the weight do the work." He tapped the nail. It bent. "Do not worry," I said. "Try again. Focus on the head of the nail. Visualize it going in before you swing." He took a breath. He swung. Bang! The nail drove straight into the wood. He looked at me, his eyes shining. I did it. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me, Leo. There are men out there who want to break us. They have money. They have power. But they do not know how to build anything. They only know how to destroy. You are a builder now. As long as you can hold a hammer, you can fix what they break. Never forget that." He nodded, gripping the hammer tight. "I won't forget Dad." By midnight, the building was secure. The heat was on. The families were fed. We had posted a watch rotation, 2 men at the front door, 2 at the back. I took the first shift. I sat in a chair by the front entrance, listening to the wind howl outside. The SUVs were still there, engines idling like predators waiting in the dark. At 2 a.m., Mr. Silva came down to relieve me. "Go sleep, Deshaun," he said. "You have done enough. We got this." I was exhausted. My body felt like it was made of lead. I went into the small office on the first floor where Leo and I had set up a cot. Leo was already asleep, curled up under 3 blankets. I took off my boots and lay down next to him. I listened to his breathing. It was the most peaceful sound in the world. I closed my eyes. I drifted into a restless sleep, dreaming of falling bricks and Julian's laughter. I do not know how long I slept. Maybe an hour, maybe 2. I woke up coughing. The air was thick, heavy. It did not smell like old dust or stale coffee. It smelled like chemicals, like burning rubber and gasoline. I sat up. The room was hazy. Smoke was curling under the doorframe. "Leo!" I shouted, shaking him awake. "Leo, get up!" He woke up groggy, rubbing his eyes. "Dad!" "Get down!" I yelled, pulling him to the floor. "Stay low!" I crawled to the door. I touched the handle. It was warm, not hot, but warm. I opened it. A wall of black smoke hit me. The hallway was filling up fast. The fire alarm was not ringing. They must have cut the wires to the alarm system too. "Fire!" I screamed, my voice tearing through the silence. "Fire! Everyone get out!" I heard screams from the floors above. The smoke was rising, turning the staircase into a chimney. I grabbed Leo's hand. "Do not let go," I ordered. "Put your shirt over your nose." We ran into the hallway. The heat was coming from below us. From the basement, the generator. They did not just cut the power. They rigged the generator. Or they threw something through the basement window. I looked toward the front door. The barricade we had built, the heavy wood and the furniture, was now a trap. It would take too long to clear it. The back door. We ran toward the rear of the building, but the smoke was thicker there. I could see the orange glow of flames licking up the walls. We were trapped on the first floor, and 12 families were trapped above us. I looked at Leo. He was coughing, his eyes wide with terror. "Dad," he choked out. I looked around frantically. I needed a tool. I needed a way out. Then I saw it. The hammer. The heavy framing hammer I had given Leo earlier. He was still clutching it in his hand. He had slept with it. "Give me the hammer, son," I said. He handed it to me. I looked at the side window, the one with the security bars. "I am going to break the glass," I yelled over the roar of the fire. "When I say go, you climb out. Do not wait for me." I swung the hammer. The glass shattered, but the iron bars were still there. I could hear the sirens in the distance. But they were too far away. The fire was roaring now, a living, breathing monster consuming the history of the building. I gripped the bars. They were old, rusted iron. I screamed a primal sound of rage and desperation and pulled. I had to get my son out, even if I had to tear the building down with my bare hands. The iron bars were rusted, but they were thick. They were put there 50 years ago to keep burglars out, but now they were keeping us in a coffin. I wrapped my hands around the cold metal. The heat from the hallway was blistering my back. I could hear the roar of the fire like a freight train coming through the living room. Dad Leo screamed, his voice breaking. "I cannot breathe." I looked at my son. His face was streaked with soot. His eyes were wide with a terror no 10-year-old should ever know. I did not pray. I did not think. I summoned every ounce of strength left in my 70-year-old body. I thought about Sarah. I thought about the man in the SUV laughing as he threw rocks. I channeled 40 years of lifting concrete and steel into my arms. I screamed. It was a guttural animal sound. I pulled until I felt the tendons in my shoulders pop. With a screech of tearing metal, the bottom bolts gave way. The grate swung out. "Go!" I yelled. I lifted Leo and shoved him through the window. He landed in the snow outside. He scrambled up, coughing. "Dad, come on," he yelled, reaching his small hand back toward me. I looked at the window. Then I looked back at the hallway. I could hear Mrs. Higgins screaming on the second floor. I could hear the baby crying in Unit 3. "I am not coming yet." "Leo," I shouted over the noise. "Run to the street. Find Ms. Rodriguez. Do not stop running." "No, Dad, no," Leo cried. "Go," I commanded. I turned my back on the safety of the snow and ran straight into the heart of the inferno. The hallway was a tunnel of black smoke. I dropped to my hands and knees, crawling under the worst of it. The heat was intense. It felt like walking into a blast furnace. My eyes stung so bad I could barely keep them open. "Mrs. Higgins," I shouted. I reached the stairs. They were wooden stairs. The bottom steps were already catching fire, licking up the varnish. I scrambled up the stairs, ignoring the pain in my knees. I reached the landing. Fire. I pounded on the doors. "Get to the roof. The stairs are gone." I kicked open Mrs. Higgins' door. She was huddled in the corner, confused, holding a picture frame. "Come on." I grabbed her arm. "We cannot go down," she wheezed. "We are going up," I said. I herded the families. The young mother with the baby. The man in the wheelchair. Mr. Silva. That was the problem. We couldn't get the wheelchair up to the roof. I looked at Mr. Silva. He was a big man, a veteran. He looked at the fire, then at me. "Leave me, Carter," he said. "Save the kids." "Not on my watch," I growled. I grabbed him under the arms. Jamal, the guy from Unit 4, grabbed his legs. "Heave," I yelled. We carried him up the last flight of stairs to the roof access door. The smoke was chasing us, thick and toxic. My lungs burned like they were filled with broken glass. We burst onto the roof. The cold night air hit us, and I gulped it down like water. We were all there. 12 families. Huddled on the flat tar roof while the building burned beneath us. But we weren't safe yet. The fire was climbing the walls. Then I heard it. The sirens. Real sirens this time. Fire trucks. I looked over the edge. The street was filled with flashing red lights. They were raising the ladder. Over here I waved my jacket. I watched as the firefighters brought them down one by one. The baby first, then Mrs. Higgins, then Mr. Silva. I was the last one on the roof. Before I stepped onto the ladder, I remembered something. The deed, the original copy with Julian's spit and signature. It was in the lockbox in the office on the first floor. If that burned, I had nothing. I looked at the firefighter waiting for me on the ladder. "Go," I yelled. "I will be right there." "Sir, the roof is unstable," he shouted. I did not listen. I ran back to the roof access door. I took a deep breath of clean air and plunged back into the smoke. I slid down the banister of the top floor. The heat was unbearable now. My suit jacket was smoking. I made it to the first floor. The office door was engulfed in flames. I shielded my face with my arm. I kicked the door. It flew open. The desk was burning. But the metal lockbox was on the floor under the window. I dove for it. I grabbed the handle. The metal was searing hot. "Ah!" I screamed as the metal burned into my palm. But I did not let go. I tucked the box under my coat and threw myself out the same broken window I had pushed Leo through. I landed hard in the snow. I rolled away from the building, clutching the box to my chest. I lay there looking up at the sky. The sparks from the fire were drifting up like angry fireflies. Dad. I felt small hands on my face. Leo. I sat up groaning. My hand was blistered. My eyebrows were singed. My suit was ruined. "I am okay, son," I wheezed. "I am okay." Paramedics swarmed us. They put an oxygen mask on my face. They wrapped my hand. I sat on the back of the ambulance watching the firefighters battle the beast. They were spraying foam, not just water. A man in a white helmet walked over to me. He was the fire marshal. "You are the owner?" he asked. I nodded, pulling the mask down. "Deshaun Carter." "Mr. Carter," the marshal said, making notes on a tablet. "We found traces of accelerant in the basement window and near the back door. This was not an accident. This was arson. Gasoline." I looked at the black SUVs across the street. They were gone. Of course they were. "I know," I said quietly. I looked toward the corner of the lot. There was an old oak tree there just outside the fence line. When we were fortifying the building yesterday, I had strapped a small battery-operated trail camera to the trunk. I used to use it to watch deer when I went hunting. Yesterday I used it to hunt rats. I stood up. I felt dizzy, but I pushed the paramedic away. "I will be right back," I said. I walked to the tree. The bark was blackened by the smoke, but the camera was on the far side facing the building. It was intact. I pulled the SD card out. I put it in my pocket. I walked back to Ms. Rodriguez, who had just arrived. She looked horrified. She was staring at the blackened building. "They tried to kill you," she whispered. "Deshaun, this is attempted murder. We have to give this to the police. We have to give this to Captain O'Malley." I looked at the police cruisers. I saw O'Malley standing there talking to the fire marshal. He was shaking his head. He looked bored. I touched the SD card in my pocket. "If I give this to O'Malley," I said, my voice raspy and cold, "the evidence will disappear before morning. He will say the camera was faulty, or the file was corrupted." "So what do we do?" Rodriguez asked. I looked at my burned hand. The pain was sharp focusing. "We do not go to the cops," I said. "We go to the source." I pulled out my phone. It was cracked, but it worked. I dialed Julian's number. It rang 4 times. "Hello?" Julian's voice was groggy. He sounded like he had been sleeping, or pretending to. "It is me," I said. There was a long silence. He probably thought he was hearing a ghost. "Deshaun," he asked. His voice trembled slightly. "Why are you calling me so late?" "I am standing in front of my building." "Julian," I said. "It is on fire." "Oh my God," he said, his tone shifting to fake shock. "That is terrible. Is everyone okay? Did anyone get hurt?" He was fishing. He wanted to know if he had killed me. "Everyone is alive." "Julian, I lied. But the building, it is ruined. The structure is compromised. The firefighters say it has to come down." I heard him exhale. It was a sound of relief, pure, victorious relief. "I am so sorry, Deshaun," he said. "That is a tragedy, really. But I suppose this solves the dispute, doesn't it? If the building is gone, the land reverts to the original zoning. You have nothing left to fight for." I let the silence stretch. I let him think I was broken. "You win, Julian," I whispered. "I am tired. I almost lost my son tonight. I cannot do this anymore." "You are making the right choice, Deshaun," Julian said, his voice becoming confident again, arrogant. It was a foolish crusade anyway. Look, I am a generous man. I will give you $10,000 for the land. Cash, just to help you get back on your feet. Sign the deed over to me and walk away. I looked at the trail cam card in my hand. I looked at the families shivering in blankets. Make it 20,000, I said, and bring the cash yourself. I do not want to deal with lawyers. I want to look you in the eye one last time. Fine, Julian said quickly. Where? The construction site office, I said. The one on top of your new unfinished tower. Tomorrow at noon. Just you and me. Done, Julian said. Get some sleep, Deshawn. You sound terrible. He hung up. I lowered the phone. Miss Rodriguez was looking at me like I was crazy. You are selling? She asked. After all this, I looked at her. I smiled. It was a terrifying smile. My face was black with soot, my eyes white and wild. I am not selling, Rodriguez. I am setting a trap. But he thinks you are giving up. That is exactly what I want him to think. I want him to feel safe. I want him to come alone. I want him to confess when he thinks no one is listening. I looked at Leo. He was drinking hot cocoa, sitting on the back of the ambulance. Take Leo to your mother's house again, I said. Keep him safe. Where are you going, Deshawn? I am going to get ready. Julian wants to meet the broken old man. But he is going to meet the ghost of the building he just burned down. I walked away from the flashing lights. I walked into the darkness. My hand throbbed. My lungs burned, but I had never felt more alive. Julian Preston had started a fire. But he didn't know that fire doesn't just destroy. Fire purifies. And tomorrow I was going to burn his whole world to the ground. The elevator to the rooftop of the Preston Tower was made of glass. As it ascended 50 stories in 30 seconds, I watched the city of Boston shrink beneath my feet. I saw the grid of streets, the flow of traffic, and far to the south a thin plume of gray smoke still rising from the blackened shell of 45 West 4th Street. My hand was wrapped in white gauze, throbbing in time with my heartbeat. My suit, the one I had bought for the gala, was ruined, stained with soot, smelling of ash and burnt rubber. I looked like a ghost who had crawled out of a chimney. When the doors slid open, the wind hit me. It was a cold, biting wind that whipped around the glass barricades of the observation deck. Julian was waiting for me. He was standing near the edge, leaning casually against the railing, looking out at his kingdom. He wore a camel hair coat that probably cost more than the 12 families in my building earned in a year. He held a tumbler of amber liquid in his hand. Scotch, single malt, the drink of victors. He turned when he heard my footsteps. His eyes swept over my burned clothes, my bandaged hand, my weary face. A smile spread across his lips. Not the polite smile of a businessman, but the predatory grin of a shark that smells blood in the water. You look terrible, Deshawn, Julian shouted over the wind, like something the cat dragged in. I walked toward him slowly, favoring my bad knee. I stopped 10 feet away. I wanted him to smell the smoke on me. I wanted him to inhale the scent of his own crime. I survived, Julian, I said, my voice rasping like sandpaper. That is more than you can say for the building. Julian chuckled and took a sip of his drink. Buildings are just bricks and mortar, Deshawn. They can be replaced. Insurance is a wonderful thing. In fact, I believe the payout from a total loss due to accidental fire will cover the demolition costs nicely. You really did me a favor by letting it burn. He walked over to a small metal table where a leather briefcase sat. Here is the 20,000, he said, patting the leather. Small bills untraceable. Just like you asked. It is a generous severance package, don't you think? For a job you never even started. I looked at the briefcase. Then I looked at him. Why fire Julian? I asked softly. Why did you have to burn it? You could have just tied us up in court. You could have bribed the judge. Why risk killing 12 people? Julian laughed, shaking his head as if I were a child asking why the sky is blue. Because you were annoying me, Deshawn. You were a pebble in my shoe. Court takes time. Bribes get messy. Fire is clean. Fire is final. It purifies the land. It erases mistakes. He stepped closer, his arrogance making him careless. He thought he was talking to a defeated man. He thought we were alone on top of the world. And honestly, he continued, his eyes cold and dead. I wanted to see you run. I wanted to see if the big, tough construction worker could save his little rat's nest. It turns out you couldn't. You failed Deshawn, just like you failed Sarah. I clenched my jaw. The name of my wife in his mouth felt like a violation. Leave Sarah out of this, I said. Why? She is the reason we are here, isn't she? Julian sneered. My poor deluded sister. You actually thought she loved you, didn't you? You thought the heiress and the handyman was a real love story. He took another step, invading my personal space. She didn't love you, Deshawn. She used you. You were her rebellion. She married a black laborer just to piss off our father. You were a walking, talking middle finger to the Preston family legacy. That is all you ever were. A prop. A pet. And when she died, she tried to leave you that building as a final joke. A way to force us to deal with her trash even from the grave. The wind howled around us. The words hung in the air, sharp and poisonous. He waited for me to break. He waited for me to scream, to cry, to attack him so he could call security and have me shot. Instead, I started to laugh. It started as a low rumble in my chest, then grew into a loud, genuine belly laugh. It was the laugh of a man who sees a child trying to explain quantum physics. Julian's smile faltered. Why are you laughing? Are you senile? I shook my head, wiping a tear of soot from my eye. I am laughing because you are so small, Julian. You are standing on top of a 50-story tower, but you are the smallest man I have ever met. I took a step forward, and for the first time, Julian took a step back. You think Sarah married me to hurt you, I asked. You think she spent 20 years waking up next to me, raising a child with me, building a life with me just to make her daddy mad? I looked him dead in the eye. She married me because I was the only man in her life who didn't look at her and see a bank account. You saw a trust fund. Your father saw a marriage alliance. I saw Sarah. I saw the woman who liked to paint watercolors in the rain. I saw the woman who cried when she found a hurt bird. I treated her like a human being, Julian, not a commodity, not a chess piece. I tapped my chest right over my heart. She died holding my hand, not yours, mine. And she left me that building not to annoy you, but because she knew I was the only one strong enough to protect the people inside from wolves like you. Julian's face turned red. He slammed his glass down on the table, shattering it. Enough, he screamed. Take the money and get out. I am done with you. Sign the transfer and vanish, or I will have you thrown off this roof. I looked at the shattered glass. I looked at the briefcase. I am not signing anything, Julian, I said calmly, and I am not taking your blood money. Then why are you here, he hissed. To record me, to get a confession. Go ahead. Show it to the police. Judge Holloway will throw it out before you can even press play. Who are they going to believe, Julian Preston, pillar of the community, or Deshawn Carter, the homeless arsonist? I reached into my pocket. Julian flinched, expecting a weapon, but I pulled out a small remote control. Not for a bomb, for a television. I pointed it at the massive outdoor screen mounted on the wall of the observation deck, the screen he used for his presentations. I didn't bring a recorder for the police, Julian, I said. And I didn't come alone. I pressed the button. The screen flickered to life, but it wasn't playing a video from my phone. It was showing a live feed. A feed from a camera mounted in the corner of this very roof terrace, hidden in the shadows of the water tower. Julian looked at the screen, confused. That is us. That is a security camera. Yes, I said. But who is watching the feed? Julian froze. He looked around the empty rooftop. Deshawn, what game are you playing? I turned my back to the view and faced the dark corner of the terrace near the elevator maintenance shed. A shadowed alcove that Julian had walked past a dozen times without looking. You can come out now, sir, I called out into the darkness. I think you have heard enough. For a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind. Julian stared at the shadows, his breathing shallow and fast. Then came the sound. Tap, tap, tap. The sound of a heavy cane hitting the metal decking. Slowly a figure emerged from the gloom. He was seated in a motorized wheelchair wrapped in a thick wool blanket. An oxygen tube ran under his nose. He was old, ancient, even, his skin like parchment paper, his hands trembling with palsy. But his eyes were clear, and they were cold as ice. It was William Preston, the patriarch, the man who had built the empire from nothing, the man everyone thought was too senile to leave his Connecticut estate. The man Julian feared more than God himself. Dad. Julian whispered. The color drained from his face until he looked like a corpse. The old man maneuvered his wheelchair forward until he was in the light. He looked at Julian. He didn't look at him with anger. He looked at him with disappointment, which was worse. The old man reached down and picked up a tablet that was resting on his lap. He tapped the screen. Julian's voice from 5 minutes ago echoed from the speakers loud and clear. Fire is clean. Fire is final. I wanted to see you run. The old man stopped the recording. He looked up at his son. I built this company on steel and concrete, Julian, the old man rasped. His voice was weak, but it cut through the wind like a razor blade. I built it on reputation. I was a ruthless man. I crushed competitors. I bought politicians. But I never, ever burned women and children in their beds. Dad, listen, it is a misunderstanding. Julian stammered, taking a step toward the wheelchair. He is manipulating you. He tricked you. Stay back, the old man barked with surprising strength. He coughed a wet, rattling sound, then composed himself. You are not a businessman, Julian. You are a thug. A sloppy, incompetent thug. You hired amateurs to burn a building on a windy night in a dense neighborhood. Do you have any idea the liability exposure you have created? He is worried about the liability, I thought. Typical Preston. But at least he was on my side for now. And then the old man continued, his eyes narrowing. You insult my daughter. You insult your sister. Julian went silent. I may have disapproved of her marriage, William said, glancing briefly at me with disdain. I may have cut her off. But she was a Preston. She had more spine in her little finger than you have in your entire body. And you desecrated her legacy because you were too lazy to go to court. Dad, please. Julian fell to his knees. It was pathetic. The master of the universe begging Daddy for forgiveness. William Preston turned his wheelchair toward me. He looked me up and down. He looked at my burned hand. He looked at my defiant stance. You, he said. Carter. I nodded. Mr. Preston, you brought this to me, he stated. You could have gone to the press. You could have gone to the feds. You came to me. Why? Because I don't want your money, I said, and I don't want to destroy your company. I just want my building, and I want him stopped. I figured you were the only one who could clean up your own house. The old man nodded slowly. A flicker of respect passed through his ancient eyes. You are smarter than you look, bricklayer, he grumbled. He turned back to Julian. Get up, William ordered. Julian stood up shaking. You are fired, William said. What? Julian gasped. Dad, you can't. I am the CEO. I own the voting shares. Not anymore, William said. You forgot about the morality clause in the trust. Commissioning a felony is grounds for immediate removal. I activated it 10 minutes ago when you confessed to arson. The board has already been notified. Security is on their way up to escort you out of the building. No, Julian screamed. This is my tower. I built this. You built nothing, William shouted, his face turning purple. You inherited it, and you almost burned it down. The elevator doors pinged open behind us. 2 large men in dark suits stepped out. They weren't Mike, the friendly guard. They were William's personal detail. Take him, William said, waving a trembling hand at his son. Get him out of my sight, and call the district attorney. Tell him the Preston family is fully cooperating with the arson investigation into a rogue employee. Julian looked at the guards. He looked at his father. Then he looked at me. His eyes were filled with a hate so pure it was almost beautiful. You are dead, Carter, he whispered as the guards grabbed his arms. You hear me. You think this is over. I will spend every dime I have left to destroy you. I will find your son. I will. One of the guards punched Julian in the stomach. Short, sharp, professional. Julian doubled over, gasping for air. That is enough, Mr. Preston, the guard said. They dragged him into the elevator. Julian's expensive shoes scraped against the floor. The doors slid shut, cutting off his screams. Silence returned to the rooftop. It was just me and the old man now. William Preston adjusted his blanket. He looked tired. He looked like a mountain that was eroding. Do not think we are friends, Carter, he said softly. I didn't do this for you. I did it for the name on the side of the building, I know I said. He looked at the smoke in the distance. The building is gone, he said. The land is valuable. I will offer you fair market value. 3 million. Take it and go to Alabama. I shook my head. No. The old man frowned. You drive a hard bargain. 5 million. I am not selling Mr. Preston. Then what do you want? He snapped. The building is a shell. It has to come down. I walked over to the edge of the roof. I looked down at the city. I am going to rebuild it, I said. With what money? He scoffed. I will figure it out, I said. But I am not selling Sarah's legacy, and I am not selling the home of 12 families who trusted me. William Preston studied me for a long time. He tapped his fingers on the armrest of his wheelchair. "You are a stubborn son of a bitch," he muttered. "Just like her." He turned his wheelchair toward the elevator. "Fix your hand, Carter," he said as he rolled away. "And if you are going to rebuild, use steel beams this time. Wood burns too easily." He disappeared into the elevator. I stood alone on the roof. I had won. Julian was gone. The giant had fallen. But as I looked at the smoke rising from 4th Street, I knew the old man was right. I had the land. I had the deed. But I had no money. A burned-out ruin and 12 homeless families looking to me for answers. And Julian was still out there, wounded, humiliated, and dangerous. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. It was a picture of Leo, walking into Ms. Rodriguez's mother's house, taken from a car across the street. Then a text followed. "Nice kid. Shame he has to grow up without a father." I gripped the phone until the screen cracked. The war wasn't over. It had just moved to the streets. The elevator doors slid shut, cutting off Julian's pathetic screams. The sound of his expensive Italian loafers dragging across the metal floor still echoed in my ears. I stood there on the roof of the world, shivering not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. For a moment, I thought it was over. I thought the dragon had been slain. I looked at William Preston, the patriarch, the man who had built this city. He sat in his wheelchair, a blanket draped over his withered legs, looking like a king on a mobile throne. He was breathing heavily, the oxygen tube under his nose hissing softly. He had just destroyed his own son to save the company. It was the coldest thing I had ever witnessed. Julian was a monster, yes, but he was William's blood. And William had cut him off like a gangrenous limb without blinking an eye. I turned to him. I felt a strange sense of camaraderie. 2 old men, 2 survivors. "Thank you, Mr. Preston," I said, my voice raspy from the smoke. "You did the right thing. Justice was served today." William Preston slowly turned his wheelchair to face me. His eyes were milky with age, but behind the cataracts there was a sharpness that could cut glass. He looked at me for a long time. He looked at my soot-stained face. He looked at my burned hand wrapped in gauze. He looked at my cheap shoes. And then he laughed. It was a dry, rattling sound like dead leaves scraping across pavement. "Justice," he wheezed. "You think this was about Justice Carter? You really are naive, aren't you?" The smile on my face faded. I took a step back. The wind whipped around us, howling through the steel girders of the unfinished tower. "He broke the law," I said. "He tried to kill people. He broke the first rule of business." William corrected, his voice turning hard as granite. "He got caught. He was sloppy. He let emotion dictate his actions. That is why I fired him. Not because he burned down a tenement, but because he failed to burn it down completely." My blood ran cold. I realized then that I had made a terrible mistake. I thought I was talking to an ally, but I was talking to the architect of the nightmare. Julian was just the executioner. William was the judge. The old man wheeled himself closer to me. The motor of his chair whined in the silence. "Let us be practical, Deshawn," he said, using my first name for the first time. It sounded like an insult coming from his mouth. "Julian is gone. He is a non-entity now. But the problem remains. The problem is you." "Me?" I asked. "I am the victim here." "You are a loose end," William said. "You have a deed that muddies the water for my investors. You have a video that could embarrass my family name. And you have a building that frankly is an eyesore on my balance sheet." He reached into the inside pocket of his coat. His hand trembled with age, but his grip was firm. He pulled out a checkbook, a long leather-bound checkbook. "I am a businessman, Carter," he said, uncapping a gold pen. "I do not deal in emotion. I deal in numbers. Everyone has a number. What is yours?" I looked at him. "I am not selling," I said. "I told you. I am going to rebuild." William ignored me. He started writing. The scratch of the pen was loud in the wind. "3 million," he muttered. "No. Let us make it 5. Julian offered you 20,000. He was an insult. I am not insulting you." He tore the check out. He held it up. The wind caught the corner, flapping it back and forth. $5 million, Deshawn. Tax-free. I will classify it as a consulting fee. I looked at the check. I saw the zeros. $5 million. I thought about the rusted Honda. I thought about the nights Leo and I spent shivering in the parking lot. I thought about the ramen noodles. I thought about the shame of not being able to buy him a winter coat. $5 million could buy a house in the suburbs. It could buy Leo a college education. It could buy us safety for the rest of our lives. All you have to do. William said, seeing the hesitation in my eyes, is give me the original deed, give me the memory card, and sign a non-disclosure agreement. He paused, and then he smiled. A cruel, thin-lipped smile. And one more thing. You leave Boston. You take that boy, that little mistake my daughter made, and you disappear. Go back to where you came from, the South, right? Or maybe Africa. I do not care. Just take the mongrel away from my city. The word hung in the air. Mongrel. The world stopped spinning. The wind stopped howling. The only thing I could hear was the pounding of my own heart. He called my son a mongrel. He called Leo Sarah's flesh and blood a mistake. I looked at the check again. $5 million. It was a lot of money. It was enough money to solve every problem I had, except one. If I took that money, I would be selling my son. I would be agreeing with this old man. I would be admitting that Leo was something to be hidden, something to be ashamed of. I would be teaching my son that his dignity had a price tag. I looked up at William Preston. The temptation vanished, replaced by a cold, white-hot rage. I reached out and took the check. William smiled. "Smart man," he said. "I knew you were reasonable. Now hand over the—" I ripped the check in half. Then I ripped it again, and again, until it was nothing but confetti. I opened my hand and let the wind take the pieces. They swirled away over the edge of the roof, dancing down toward the street 50 stories below. William's jaw dropped. His face turned a shade of purple I had never seen before. "Are you insane?" he whispered. "That was $5 million. You are a beggar. You have nothing." "I have my son," I said, my voice steady and strong. "And my son is not a mistake. He is the best thing that ever came out of your twisted, poisoned family." I took a step closer to the wheelchair, leaning down until my face was inches from his. "And he is not a mongrel. He is a Carter, and Carters do not sell their honor. Not for $5 million, not for 50. William stared at me. For the first time, I saw fear in his eyes. Not physical fear, but the fear of a man who encounters something he cannot buy. "You are making a grave error, Deshawn," he hissed, spittle flying from his lips. "You think you beat Julian so you can beat me." Julian was a child. I am an institution. I straightened up. I adjusted my burned jacket. "I am not afraid of you, old man," I said. "You should be." William snarled. "I will bury you. I will drain you dry. I will sue you in every court in this state. I will have the city inspectors condemn your building every single day. I will make sure you cannot buy a loaf of bread in this town without a lawyer present." He slammed his hand on the armrest. "I offered you a life preserver," he screamed. "Now I'm going to drown you." I turned to walk away. My knee hurt. My hand throbbed. I had no money. I had no home. I had just declared war on a billionaire. But I felt light. I felt clean. "Do your worst, Mr. Preston," I said over my shoulder. "But remember one thing. Steel gets stronger in the fire. You just forged me into something you cannot break." I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button. As the doors closed, I saw William Preston frantically dialing his phone, his face twisted in hate. He wasn't calling his son. He wasn't calling a doctor. He was calling his generals. The ride down was silent. I leaned my head against the cool glass. I was tired. God, I was so tired. But then I pictured Leo. I pictured him hitting that nail with the hammer. I pictured him standing tall. I pulled out my phone. I had a text from Ms. Rodriguez. "Deshawn, where are you? The police just released the scene. We can go back to the building." I typed back with my good hand. "I am coming. And Rodriguez. Get ready for a long fight. I just turned down $5 million. I hit send. I walked out of the Preston Tower. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the city. I got into my car. The engine struggled to turn over. It wheezed and coughed before finally catching. I drove south toward the smoke. I knew what was coming. The lawsuits, the threats, the hunger. But as I turned onto 4th Street, I saw something I didn't expect. There were lights, not street lights, work lights. I pulled up to the burnt-out shell of my building. There were people there. Dozens of them. The 12 families were there, of course, sweeping debris. But there were others. Men in hard hats. Men with tool belts. I saw Mike, the security guard from the Preston building. He was carrying a stack of lumber. I saw the guy from the hardware store, the one who had watched my card get declined. He was unloading a truck full of drywall. I parked the car and got out. "What is this?" I whispered. Mrs. Higgins, the old woman from Unit 1A, walked up to me. She was holding a thermos of coffee. "We made some calls," she said, smiling. "People heard what happened. They heard about the fire. They heard you ran back in." Mike walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "I quit my job, Deshaun," he said. "I couldn't work for them anymore. Not after what I saw." I told the union guys what happened. He pointed to the crowd. There were 30 men there. Electricians, plumbers, carpenters. "They are here to volunteer," Mike said. "We heard you wanted to rebuild." "Well, you taught half these guys how to hold a hammer. We figured it was time to pay you back." I looked at them. Black, white, Hispanic, young and old. They weren't there for a paycheck. They were there for respect. I felt tears prick my eyes. William Preston had his millions. He had his lawyers and his politicians, but he didn't have this. I walked into the center of the site. I climbed onto a pile of rubble. I looked at the men. I looked at the families. "All right," I shouted, my voice cracking with emotion. "If we are going to do this, we do it right. I want the structural assessment done by midnight. I want the debris cleared by dawn." A cheer went up. I picked up a shovel. My hand hurt like hell, but I gripped the handle tight. "Let us get to work." We worked through the night. But across town in a mansion on the hill, William Preston was not sleeping. He was sitting in his study staring at a picture of me. And he was making a call to a man who didn't use lawyers. A man who solved problems that money couldn't fix. The war had just begun, and the first shot was about to be fired. The courtroom smelled of lemon polish and old lies. It was a smell I knew well from my days working construction on the county courthouse renovations 20 years ago. Back then, I was the man sanding the mahogany benches and varnishing the railings. I was the invisible labor that made the halls of justice look dignified. Now I was sitting on one of those benches, and I felt smaller than the dust I used to sweep up. Judge Holloway sat on the bench high above us. He was a man with a face like a bulldog and eyes that looked at me with bored contempt. I knew him. Or rather, I knew of him. He was the kind of judge who played golf at the country club with men like William Preston. He was the kind of judge who looked at a black man in a torn suit with a bandaged hand and saw a criminal before the gavel even banged. On the other side of the aisle sat the Preston legal team. There were 4 of them. They wore suits that cost more than the building I was fighting for. Their lead attorney was a man named Vance. He was tall, thin, and had a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He didn't look at me. He looked through me. To him, I wasn't a person. I was a clerical error that needed to be corrected. Ms. Rodriguez sat next to me. She was gripping her pen so hard her knuckles were white. She had been fighting for me all morning, but it was like trying to stop a tidal wave with a bucket. Every objection she raised was overruled. Every piece of evidence she presented was dismissed as circumstantial. "Your Honor," Vance said, standing up and buttoning his jacket, "we are not here to debate the validity of a property deed that was clearly obtained through coercion. That is a matter for civil litigation that will take years to resolve. We are here for a much more urgent matter, the immediate safety of a minor." He pointed a finger at Leo. My son was sitting in the back row behind the wooden partition. He looked so small in the oversized chair. He was wearing his best shirt, the one I had ironed for him that morning, but the collar was frayed. He was clutching a small notebook against his chest. His eyes were wide, darting back and forth between me and the scary man in the suit. Mr. Carter, Vance continued, his voice smooth, as silk, has no fixed address. He has no income. Oh, he has been living in a car. And 2 nights ago, he was involved in a violent arson incident that nearly killed 12 people. The state has a duty to protect this child from an unstable environment. "Objection," Ms. Rodriguez shouted, standing up. "Mr. Carter saved those people. He ran into a burning building to rescue them while the Preston family watched from their ivory tower. Judge Holloway didn't even look up from his papers." Overruled. "Sit down, Ms. Rodriguez," Mr. Vance continued. Vance smiled. It was a shark's smile. "Thank you, Your Honor. We have submitted into evidence a psychiatric evaluation of Mr. Carter conducted by Dr. Aris, a leading specialist in geriatric dementia." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had never met a Dr. Aris. I had never had a psychiatric evaluation. I leaned over to Rodriguez. "Who is that?" I whispered. "I never saw a doctor." "Shh," she hissed, her eyes wide with panic. "Let them talk." Vance held up a thick file. According to Dr. Aris, Mr. Carter exhibits classic signs of early onset dementia aggravated by paranoia. The report suggests that Mr. Carter's obsession with the Preston family and his delusions of grandeur regarding the property are symptoms of a fractured mind. It is the doctor's professional opinion that Mr. Carter is not only unfit to care for a child, but is a danger to himself and others. That is a lie. I stood up, slamming my good hand on the table. The pain shot up my arm, but I didn't care. "I have never met this doctor. This is a fabrication." "Sit down, Mr. Carter." Judge Holloway barked, banging his gavel. "One more outburst and I will hold you in contempt." "But, Your Honor," Rodriguez pleaded, "this report is dated yesterday. My client was with me all day. He was never examined by Dr. Aris. This is admissible hearsay at best and fraud at worst." The judge looked at Rodriguez over his glasses. Dr. Aris examined the police reports and the video footage of Mr. Carter attacking a construction site with a tire iron. His expert opinion is valid. The court accepts the findings. My stomach dropped. It wasn't a trial. It was an execution. They weren't just trying to take the building. They were trying to take my mind. They were trying to paint me as a crazy, violent old man so they could lock me up and throw away the key. Vance walked toward the judge's bench. "Your Honor, given Mr. Carter's mental state and his complete lack of financial resources, the Preston family is willing to step in. Despite the harassment they have endured, Mr. William Preston is a man of great charity. He is willing to take custody of the boy." The room spun. Custody. William Preston wanted Leo, the man who called my son a mongrel, the man who wanted us to disappear. He didn't want to raise Leo. He wanted to hide him. He wanted to erase him, or worse, turn him into a servant just like Julian had threatened. "Your Honor," Vance said, lowering his voice to a sympathetic whisper, "the boy is half Preston by blood. He belongs with his family. He belongs in a home with heat, with food, with stability. Not in a burnt-out shell of a building with a man who fights bulldozers." Ms. Rodriguez stood up again, but she looked defeated. "Your Honor, the boy is terrified of them. He has lived with his father his whole life. To separate them now would be psychologically devastating." The judge waved his hand dismissively. "Poverty is not a crime, Ms. Rodriguez, but negligence is. And sleeping in a car in winter is negligence. Running into a fire with a child is negligence." He picked up his pen. He opened the folder in front of him. I looked at the back of the room. Leo was crying silently. Tears were rolling down his cheeks, dripping onto his notebook. He looked at me and I saw the question in his eyes. "Dad, are you going to fix this?" "You fix everything." "But I couldn't fix this. I could fix a roof. I could wire a generator. I could fight a man with my fists. But I couldn't fight this ink and paper. I couldn't fight the millions of dollars that were crushing us." "Please," I whispered. My voice broke. "Please, Your Honor. He is my life. He is all I have." Judge Holloway looked at me. For a second, I thought I saw a flicker of humanity. But then he looked at Vance. He looked at the Preston legal team, who were already packing up their briefcases, confident in their victory. Mr. Carter, the judge, said, his voice cold and final. "The court's primary concern is the welfare of the child. You have no home. You have no money. You have a documented history of violence and instability. I have no choice but to grant the petition for emergency temporary custody." "No," I screamed. The bailiff stepped forward, his hand on his holster. The judge signed the first page. "I order that Leo Carter be placed in the custody of the Department of Social Services immediately pending transfer to the Preston Estate guardianship." The gavel went up. It hovered in the air like a guillotine blade ready to sever the bond between a father and son. I looked at Ms. Rodriguez. She had her head in her hands. I looked at Vance. He was checking his watch, probably thinking about his lunch reservation. I looked at Leo. And then something happened. Leo stood up. He was 10 years old. He was wearing scuffed sneakers and a shirt that was too big. But he stood up straight. He didn't look at the bailiff. He didn't look at the lawyers. He looked straight at the man in the black robe. "Wait!" Leo shouted. His voice was high and trembling, but it cut through the murmuring courtroom like a bell. The judge paused. The gavel didn't come down. He looked over his glasses, annoyed. "Sit down, young man," the bailiff said, moving toward him. "No," Leo said, stepping into the aisle. He clutched his notebook tighter. "You can't take me." "You didn't ask me, Leo," Ms. Rodriguez said softly, turning around. "Leo, please don't make it worse. Let him speak," I roared. "My son wants to speak." The judge sighed. He looked at the clock. "This is highly irregular. The child is a minor. He is the victim," Leo shouted. He was shaking now, his whole body vibrating with fear and anger. "You talked about me for an hour. You talked about my dad, but nobody asked me." The courtroom went silent. Even Vance stopped packing his briefcase. There is a power in the voice of a child when it speaks truth to power. It makes grown men uncomfortable. Judge Holloway lowered the gavel slowly without banging it. He leaned back in his chair. "Come here, son," he said. His voice was less harsh now. "Come to the bench." Leo walked up the aisle. He walked past the expensive suits. He walked past me. He didn't stop to hug me. He was on a mission. He looked like a soldier marching into enemy fire. He stood in front of the massive wooden desk. The top of his head barely reached the surface. "What is your name?" the judge asked. "Leo Carter," he said. "And do you understand what is happening here, Leo?" "Yes," Leo said. "You are trying to steal me." A gasp went through the room. Vance stood up. "Your Honor, I object to this." "Sit down," Mr. Vance, the judge snapped. "I want to hear this. Go on, Leo. Why do you say we are stealing you?" "Because you said my dad is crazy," Leo said. "You said he has a bad brain. But you are wrong." He opened his notebook. It was a cheap spiral-bound notebook, the kind you buy at the dollar store. The pages were crinkled and stained with soot. "My mom wrote this," Leo said, his voice wavering. "Before she died, she wrote in this book every day. She told me to hide it. She said if anything ever happened, I should read it to remember who loves me." He turned the pages with trembling fingers. The judge leaned forward. "What is that book, Leo?" "It is her diary," Leo said. "And she wrote about them too." He pointed a small finger at the Preston lawyers. "She wrote about Uncle Julian and Grandpa William." Vance's face went pale. "Your Honor, this is inadmissible. We have no way of verifying." "Read it, Leo," the judge commanded, ignoring the lawyer. "Read what she wrote." Leo took a deep breath. He looked down at the handwriting of the mother he missed so much. "October 14th, he read. "Julian came by today. He was drunk again. He told me that if I didn't sign the trust fund over to him, he would tell everyone that Deshawn hits me." He laughed. "He said nobody would believe a black construction worker over a Preston. But Deshawn has never hit me. He rubs my feet when they hurt. He carries me up the stairs because the chemo makes me weak. Julian is the one who scares me. He has eyes like a dead fish." The silence in the courtroom was absolute. You could hear a pin drop. You could hear Vance's heavy breathing. Leo turned the page. "November 3rd, Dad called. Grandpa William. He said I was an embarrassment. He said Deshawn was dirty. He said I should put Leo in boarding school so he can learn to be white. But I don't want Leo to be white. Or black. I want him to be like Deshawn. Brave, strong, kind." Leo looked up at the judge. Tears were streaming down his face again, but his voice didn't break. "My dad isn't crazy," Leo said. "He saved us from the fire. Uncle Julian's men started the fire. I saw them throw the bottle. My dad ran back in to get this book. He burned his hand for me. Does a crazy person do that?" He slammed the notebook shut. "If you send me to live with them," Leo said, pointing at the empty chair where William Preston would have sat, "he will punish me for being alive. My dad punishes me when I don't do my homework. That is the difference." I put my head in my hands and wept. I wept for the bravery of my son. I wept for the truth that was finally being spoken. The judge looked at Leo. Then he looked at me. Then he looked at the expensive lawyers who were suddenly shuffling their papers looking for an exit. Judge Holloway picked up the psychiatric report, the one signed by the doctor who never met me. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he slowly tore it in half. He looked at Vance. "Mr. Vance," the judge said, his voice low and dangerous. "I think we need to take a short recess. And during that recess, I suggest you call your client. Because if what this boy just read is true, and I have a feeling it is, then this custody hearing just became a criminal investigation." He banged the gavel. "Court is in recess for 30 minutes. Leo turned around. He ran down the aisle. I fell to my knees and opened my arms. He crashed into me, burying his face in my chest. "I got you, Dad," he sobbed. "I got you." I held him tight, smelling the smoke that still lingered in his hair. "You got me, son," I whispered. "You saved us both." But as I looked over Leo's shoulder, I saw Vance on his phone. He wasn't looking scared anymore. He was looking angry. He was nodding. The legal battle might be turning, but the Prestons weren't the kind of people who let a diary defeat them. They were the kind of people who made witnesses disappear. The judge gave us 30 minutes. I had a feeling those 30 minutes were going to be the longest of my life. The 30 minutes of recess felt like 30 years. The courtroom clock ticked with a rhythm that sounded like a hammer hitting a coffin nail. Tick, tack, tick, tack. Every second was a second closer to losing my son. I sat at the defendant's table, my hands clasped together, praying to a God I hadn't spoken to in a long time. I prayed not for victory, but for mercy. Beside me, Ms. Rodriguez was furiously typing on her phone, trying to find a precedent, a loophole, anything to stop the juggernaut of the Preston legal team. But the real battle wasn't happening at the table. It was happening in the front row where a 10-year-old boy was clutching a dirty, spiral-bound notebook like it was a holy scripture. Leo didn't look at me. He was staring at the empty judge's bench, his jaw set in a line of determination that I recognized. It was the same look his mother used to have when she refused to take her pain medication because she wanted to be lucid enough to read him a bedtime story. The bailiff shouted, "All rise." Judge Holloway walked back in. His robe swished softly, a sound of ominous authority. He sat down. He adjusted his glasses. He looked at Vance, the Preston lawyer, and then he looked at Leo. "Young man," the judge said, his voice surprisingly soft, "you may continue. You said you wanted to tell us about the negligence, about living in the car." Vance stood up immediately. "Your Honor, I must object. This is highly irregular. The child has been coached. This is emotional manipulation." "Sit down, Mr. Vance," the judge snapped without looking at him, "or I will have you removed." Leo stood up again. He didn't walk to the witness stand. He just stood in the aisle, small and defiant. "Mr. Vance says my dad is negligent," Leo began. His voice trembled at first, then found its footing. "He says we slept in a car because my dad is a loser. But that is not true. We slept in the car because Uncle Julian changed the locks on our house while we were at the funeral." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Leo continued, his voice gaining strength. "It was cold. It was 12 degrees. I know because I watched the numbers on the dashboard. I was shivering. My teeth were hurting. Do you know what my dad did?" He looked at the judge, waiting for an answer. The judge shook his head slightly. "He took off his coat," Leo said. "He took off his sweater. He put them on me. He sat there in his t-shirt for 6 hours, rubbing my arms to keep me warm. His lips turned blue. I saw them. They were blue, Your Honor. And when I asked him if he was cold, he smiled and said he was sweating. I bit my lip to keep from sobbing. I remembered that night. I remembered the pain in my bones, but I didn't know Leo was watching. I thought he was asleep. He gave me the last burger," Leo said. "He told me he already ate, but I heard his stomach growling. It sounded like a monster, but he didn't eat. He watched me eat." "Is that negligence?" Leo looked at Vance. The fancy lawyer shifted uncomfortably in his $3,000 suit. "Uncle Julian has a big house," Leo said. "He has 10 bedrooms. The heat is always on. But when we went there to ask for help, he didn't give us a coat. He didn't give us a burger. He gave us $200 and told us to get out before he called the police." Leo took a step closer to the bench. "So, who is the bad parent? The man who freezes so I can be warm, or the man who locks his family out in the snow?" The courtroom was dead silent. Even the court reporter had stopped typing for a second, mesmerized by the raw truth coming from a child's mouth. "But that is not why I am here," Leo said. He lifted the notebook. "I am here because of this." Ms. Rodriguez leaned over to me. "Deshawn," she whispered, "did you know about this diary?" I shook my head. Sarah never showed it to me. She must have known I would do something rash if I read it. She was protecting me even from the grave. Leo opened the book. The pages crinkled loudly in the silence. "Mr. Vance says I belong with the Prestons," Leo said. "He says I am family. But listen to what my mom wrote on Christmas Eve last year." He found the page. He ran his finger under the lines. "December 24th. Leo read, "We went to the estate for dinner. It was a mistake. Father was drinking. He looked at Leo playing with the new train set Deshawn bought him. Father laughed. He said it was a waste of money to buy toys for a half-breed. He said Leo would never run the company. He said Leo's only purpose was to inherit the voting shares that were left to me by grandmother. He said once I am dead, they will take the shares and put Leo in a boarding school in Switzerland so they never have to look at him again. The gasp from the audience was audible this time. Reporters in the back row were frantically typing on their phones. Leo looked up. His eyes were filled with tears. "They don't want me, Your Honor. They want my shares." My mom knew it. That is why she wrote this part. He turned to the very last page of the notebook. The ink was different, shaky. It must have been written right before she went to the hospital for the last time. "To whoever finds this," Leo read, "if I die, please, I beg you, do not let my family take my son. They are wolves in sheep's clothing. They will destroy his spirit. My husband, Deshaun Carter, is the only father Leo has ever known. He is the only one who loves Leo for who he is, not for what he owns. Deshaun is the guardian of my heart and the guardian of my son. If Julian tries to take him, know this. Julian threatened me. He told me that accidents happen to people who refuse to sign over their trust funds. I am afraid for my life, and I am afraid for my son." Leo closed the book. He looked at the judge. "My mom was afraid of them," Leo whispered. "And I am afraid too. Please don't send me there. Please let me stay with my dad. We don't need a house. We don't need money. I just need him." Leo walked back to the bench and placed the notebook on the judge's desk. "It is all in there," he said. Then he turned and walked back to his seat. He sat down next to the bailiff and buried his face in his hands. Judge Holloway picked up the notebook. He handled it like it was a bomb. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. He read the first page, then the second. Then he flipped to the back. His face, usually a mask of indifference, began to change. His jaw tightened, his brow furrowed. The color rose in his cheeks. He looked up at Vance. "Mr. Vance," the judge said. His voice was no longer soft. It was ice cold. "Yes, Your Honor," Vance said, standing up. He looked nervous now. He was sweating. "Were you aware of the existence of this journal?" "No, Your Honor. As I said, this is likely a forgery, a child's scrawl. We have no proof that Sarah Preston wrote this." The judge held up the notebook. "I have presided over probate court for 20 years, Mr. Vance. I have seen Sarah Preston's signature on dozens of documents. I know her handwriting, and I know the handwriting of a dying woman. This is not a forgery." He slammed the notebook down. "This is a testament, and it contains allegations of extortion, death threats, and conspiracy to commit fraud against a minor." Vance stammered. "Your Honor, surely you can't take the ramblings of a sick woman as fact." "I can and I will," the judge roared, "especially when they align perfectly with the testimony of this child." The judge turned to me. "Mr. Carter, please stand up." I stood up. My legs felt weak. "Mr. Carter," the judge said, "I owe you an apology. This court has been misled. We were told this was a case of poverty versus stability. It appears it is actually a case of protection versus predation." He looked at the bailiff. "The temporary custody order is hereby vacated. Leo Carter remains in the care of his father, Deshaun Carter, effective immediately." I let out a sob that tore through my chest. I grabbed the table to keep from falling. Ms. Rodriguez grabbed my arm, squeezing it tight. "We did it, Deshaun. We did it." But the judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, he continued, glaring at Vance. "I am placing this journal into evidence. I am ordering an immediate investigation by the district attorney's office into the allegations made by Sarah Preston regarding threats to her life and the predatory intent of the Preston Family Trust." Vance turned pale. "Your Honor, this is preposterous." "Sit down," the judge shouted, "and Mr. Vance, I suggest you inform your client, Mr. William Preston, that he is strictly forbidden from contacting the child or the father. If he comes within 500 feet of them, I will issue an arrest warrant for kidnapping." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. "Court is adjourned pending the DA's review." I turned around. Leo ran into my arms. I lifted him up, spinning him around, burying my face in his neck. "You saved us," I whispered. "You brave, beautiful boy." "I saved us, Dad," he said. As we hugged, a strange sound began to fill the courtroom. It started as a few beeps, then a buzz, then a cacophony of ringtones. Every reporter, every lawyer, every clerk in the room was looking at their phones. I looked at Ms. Rodriguez. She was looking at her tablet. Her eyes were wide. "What is it?" I asked. "Deshaun," she said, turning the screen toward me. "Look." It was a financial news channel. The headline was flashing in bold red letters. "Preston Empire in free fall. Stock plunges 40% after courtroom revelations." The news of the diary had leaked. The reporters in the back row had been live tweeting Leo's testimony. The world knew. They knew about the cruelty, they knew about the threats, they knew about the half-breed comment. And Wall Street was reacting. Preston Development is toxic, Rodriguez said. Their investors are pulling out, their board is calling for an emergency meeting. Julian was fired yesterday, but now the whole family is going down. I looked at Vance. He was packing his bag frantically, ignoring the calls on his cell phone. He looked like a rat fleeing a sinking ship. We walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was packed with cameras. Flashes blinded us. Microphones were shoved in my face. Mr. Carter! Mr. Carter! Is it true you own the subway expansion land? Mr. Carter, what do you have to say to William Preston? I didn't answer. I just held Leo's hand tighter. I pulled my coat collar up, the same coat I had given Leo in the car, and pushed through the crowd. We walked out into the fresh air. It was still cold, but the sun was shining. It is over, Dad, Leo asked. I looked at the headlines on the newsstand. I looked at the panic on the faces of the Preston lawyers running to their limos. No, son, I said. The fighting is over. The reckoning has just begun. But as I walked toward my car, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. The window rolled down. It wasn't Julian. It wasn't William. It was a man I didn't know. He wore a simple gray suit. He didn't look like a lawyer. He looked like government. Mr. Carter, he asked. Yes, my name is Agent Miller, FBI. We have been monitoring the Preston family for months regarding money laundering allegations. But we needed a witness. He looked at the notebook in Leo's hand. I think your son just gave us the key to the castle. We would like to talk to you. I looked at Ms. Rodriguez. She nodded. I looked at the agent. We are hungry, I said. My son wants a burger, a real one. Agent Miller smiled. I think the Bureau can afford lunch, Mr. Carter. We got into the car. The Prestons had tried to bury us. They had tried to burn us. But they forgot the most important rule of nature. Seeds grow in the dark. And today, we broke through the concrete. The burger joint was loud and smelled of grease and onions, but to me, it smelled like victory. Leo was sitting across from me, wiping ketchup off his chin with the back of his hand. He was laughing at something the FBI agent had said. For the first time in weeks, the shadows under his eyes seemed a little lighter. I watched him eat. I watched the way he held the burger with both hands, afraid someone might take it away. It broke my heart and healed it all at the same time. We had won in court. The judge had believed him. The stock market was crashing. The Prestons were running for cover. I thought the war was over. I thought we could finally breathe. I was wrong. A wounded animal is the most dangerous thing in the woods, and I had forgotten that Julian Preston was not just a businessman. He was a narcissist who had just been stripped of his crown. I dropped Leo off at school at 8 a.m. I watched him walk toward the big brick building. He turned around and waved. He looked happy, normal. I love you, Dad, he shouted. I love you too, son. I watched him walk through the gate. I waited until he was inside the doors. That was my routine. I never drove away until I knew he was safe. I put the car in gear. I was about to pull away when my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I picked it up thinking it was Ms. Rodriguez, or maybe the FBI agent. Hello. The voice on the other end was breathless, jagged, like someone who had been running or screaming. Did he wave goodbye? Deshawn? My blood froze in my veins. I slammed on the brakes. Julian. He looked so small walking through those doors, Julian whispered. He sounded drunk, or high, or maybe just insane. His voice had a trembling quality to it, a vibration of pure, unhinged chaos. So fragile, like a little bird. Where are you? I shouted, looking frantically at the school doors. I am watching you, Julian giggled. I am always watching you. You took everything from me, Deshawn. My company, my father, my name. You turned the whole world against me. You think you can just walk away. You think you can go eat burgers and play happy family. Julian, listen to me. It is over. The FBI is investigating. If you do anything. The FBI. Julian screamed. The sound was so loud I had to pull the phone away from my ear. Screw the FBI. I built this city. I am a god in this town. And you are dirt. You are nothing. I heard a sound in the background, a muffled cry. My heart stopped. Daddy. It was Leo. It was Leo's voice, but it wasn't coming from the school. It was coming from the phone. I looked at the school doors. They were closed. But then I saw it. By the side exit, a black maintenance van was speeding away. The tires screeched as it tore around the corner. "Leo," I screamed, hitting the steering wheel. "Do not follow me," Julian hissed. "If I see one police car, if I hear one siren, I will throw him off the edge. Do you hear me? I will throw him into the ocean and you will never find him." "What do you want?" I begged, tears blurring my vision. "Take the money. Take the building. I will sign whatever you want. Just don't hurt him. He is a child, Julian. He is your nephew. He is a mongrel," Julian spat. "And he is the reason my life is over." I heard the van engine revving. "Meet me at the old Navy Yard, Deshawn, Pier 4, the abandoned crane. Come alone. If you bring the lawyer, if you bring the cops, he dies." "What do you want me to do?" I asked, my voice shaking so hard I could barely speak. "I want you to bring the deed," Julian said. "And I want you to bring a pen. You are going to sign a confession. You are going to write that you lied, that you forged the diary, that you blackmailed my family. You are going to restore my reputation." "I will do it," I said. "I will write whatever you want," good Julian said. "And then, after you sign it, you are going to jump." The line went silent for a second. "Excuse me," I whispered. "You are going to jump off the pier, Deshawn. You are going to kill yourself. That is the only way this ends. A suicide note and a body. That is the only way I get my life back." I gripped the phone. The sheer madness of it was terrifying. He didn't just want to win. He wanted a sacrifice. "You have 1 hour," Julian said. "Tick-tock, bricklayer." The line went dead. I sat there in the idling car. My hands were shaking so bad I couldn't feel my fingers. I looked at the school. I looked at the road where the van had disappeared. My first instinct was to call Agent Miller. He had a gun. He had a badge. He could call a SWAT team. But Julian was watching. If he saw a police barricade, if he heard a helicopter, he would do it. He had nothing left to lose. A man with nothing to lose is capable of anything. I couldn't risk the police. They were too loud, too slow. They followed procedures. They negotiated. Julian wasn't negotiating. He was executing. I needed a different kind of help. I needed men who knew the Navy Yard, men who knew how to move through shadows and steel, men who didn't wait for a warrant to kick down a door. I put the car in gear. I didn't drive toward the police station. I drove toward South Boston, toward the industrial park. I pulled up in front of a low brick building with a faded sign. Local 103, Ironworkers and Laborers Union. It was the middle of the day. The parking lot was full of pickup trucks. I ran inside. The hall was thick with cigarette smoke and the smell of stale beer. A group of men were sitting at the bar watching the news on a small TV. They turned when I burst in. Deshawn, one of them, asked. It was Big Marcus, the foreman I had worked with on the Prudential Tower. He was 6'5" with hands the size of shovels. He stood up. Everyone stood up. They had seen the news. They knew who I was. "Deshawn, what happened?" Marcus asked, seeing the terror in my eyes. "You look like you saw a ghost." "They took him." I gasped, leaning against a pool table to catch my breath. "Julian Preston. He took Leo." The room went deadly silent. The pool balls stopped clicking. The TV seemed to mute itself. "He took the boy." Marcus asked, his voice low and dangerous. "He has him at the Navy Yard," I said. "He wants me to come alone. He wants me to kill myself or he kills Leo. He said, if I call the cops..." I couldn't finish the sentence. I broke down. I buried my face in my hands. "I am 70 years old, Marcus. I cannot fight him. He has security guards. He has guns. I am just a tired old man." I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was heavy, warm. "You are not just an old man," Deshawn, Marcus said. "You are a brother." I looked up. Marcus wasn't looking at me with pity. He was looking at me with rage. He looked around the room. "You hear that, boys?" he shouted. "That rich suit thinks he can snatch a kid off the street. He thinks he can threaten one of us." Chairs scraped against the floor. Men were standing up. Not just a few. All of them. There was Tony the electrician who I had saved from a live wire in '95. There was Sal the welder whose mortgage I helped pay when he got sick. There was young Mike the security guard who had quit his job yesterday. "Grab your gear," Marcus ordered. They didn't grab guns. They grabbed tools. I saw men picking up crowbars. I saw them grabbing heavy wrenches. I saw one man pick up a nail gun and check the cartridge. Another grabbed a sledgehammer, the kind we use to break concrete. "We aren't calling the cops," Marcus said, walking toward the door. "We handle our own." We walked out into the parking lot. It was a convoy, 20 pickup trucks. Engines roared to life. It sounded like thunder. I got into the passenger seat of Marcus's truck. He threw a hard hat onto the dashboard. "Put it on Deshawn," he said. "We are going to a job site." I put the yellow hard hat on my head. It felt familiar. It felt safe. We drove in a column. We didn't use sirens. We moved with the grim purpose of a thunderstorm rolling in off the harbor. As we crossed the bridge toward the Navy Yard, I looked at the line of trucks behind us. I saw the faces of the men, grim, determined. Julian Preston had money. He had lawyers. He had madness on his side, but he had made a fatal calculation. He thought power came from a bank account. He was about to learn that real power comes from the calloused hands of the men who built his world. I checked my watch. 30 minutes left. "Hang on, Leo," I whispered, staring at the cranes looming in the distance. "The cavalry is coming, and we are bringing the hammers." The rusted gates of the Navy Yard loomed ahead like the teeth of a dead monster. The air smelled of saltwater diesel fuel and rotting wood. It was a place where things went to be forgotten, ships that would never sail again, cranes that had rusted into statues, and today it was where Julian Preston wanted to end my life. The convoy of pickup trucks came to a halt 50 yards from the main warehouse, Pier 4. The building was a massive skeleton of corrugated steel and broken glass. Inside, the shadows were deep enough to hide an army. I stepped out of the truck. My legs felt heavy not from age but from the sheer weight of the fear I was carrying. My son was in there. Marcus walked up beside me. He was holding a 3-foot crowbar. His face was set in stone. "We go in hard." "Deshawn," he said quietly. "My boys take the perimeter. You and me, we go for the kid." I nodded. I adjusted the hard hat on my head. It was the only armor I had. "Let us go," I said. We moved toward the warehouse. 20 men. No shouting, no war cries. Just the sound of work boots crunching on gravel. The sound of tools gripping tight in sweaty hands. We were an army of ghosts coming to collect a debt. We reached the side door. It was chained shut. Marcus didn't hesitate. He swung the crowbar. The sound of metal snapping echoed like a gunshot. He kicked the door open. We poured inside. The warehouse was cavernous. Shafts of dusty sunlight pierced through holes in the roof, illuminating the vast empty space. In the center, under the hook of a massive overhead crane, stood the black van. And there were men. Julian had hired muscle, 4 of them. They were big men in tactical gear, holding batons and tasers. They looked surprised. They were expecting one old man to walk in trembling. They weren't expecting a Union crew. "Get them!" Marcus roared. The chaos erupted instantly. It wasn't a graceful fight. It was a brawl. It was the kind of fight you see on a Saturday night in a dive bar, but with higher stakes. My brothers charged forward. I saw Tony the electrician tackle a guard who was reaching for a taser. I saw Sal the welder swing a heavy chain, knocking a baton out of another man's hand. I didn't stop to fight. I had one target. I ran toward the center of the room. My bad knee screamed with every step, but I didn't feel it. I was running on pure adrenaline. "Leo," I screamed. "Leo, Daddy." The voice came from above. I looked up. My heart stopped. On a metal catwalk 30 feet above the concrete floor stood Julian Preston. He was holding Leo by the back of his shirt. Leo was dangling dangerously close to the edge. Julian looked wild. His hair was disheveled, his expensive coat torn. He looked down at the brawl below with wide, manic eyes. "Stop!" Julian screamed. "Stop or I drop him." I froze. "Marcus," I yelled. "Hold!" The fighting stopped. The Union men stepped back, breathing hard. The guards scrambled away, nursing their bruises, looking up at their employer with confusion. I walked into the center of the beam of light. I took off my hard hat. I wanted him to see my face. I wanted him to see the eyes of the man he had tried to break. "Let him go, Julian," I said. My voice was calm, terrifyingly calm. "This is between you and me." Julian laughed. It was a high-pitched, jagged sound that bounced off the steel walls. "You brought an army?" he shrieked. "You cheated Deshawn. You always cheat. You cheated my family out of the building. You cheated my father out of his loyalty. And now you bring these animals to fight your battles." I walked toward the metal staircase that led up to the catwalk. "I am coming up, Julian," I said. "Just you and me." "Stay back," Julian yelled, pulling Leo closer to the rail. Leo whimpered. He was shaking so hard I thought he might pass out. I kept walking. I put my hand on the railing. I started to climb. 1 step. 2 steps. Julian reached into his coat pocket. He pulled out a gun. It was a small silver pistol, A rich man's toy. He pointed it at me. I said, "Stop," he screamed. "I will shoot. I swear to God, I will shoot you." I looked up at him. I saw the gun barrel shaking. I saw the sweat pouring down his face. I saw the terror in his eyes. Not terror of me. Terror of what he had become. "You have never held a tool in your life, Julian," I said, climbing another step. "You have never built anything. You have never fixed anything. And you have never killed anything. You pay people to do your dirty work, but your guards are down there. They cannot help you now." "I am not afraid to pull the trigger," Julian yelled. His finger was trembling on the guard. I reached the top of the stairs. I was on the catwalk now, 20 feet away from him. I walked toward him. I didn't run. I didn't duck. I walked tall. "Then shoot me," I said. Julian's eyes went wide. "What? Shoot me!" I roared, spreading my arms wide, exposing my chest. "Do it. Put a bullet in me, but you better aim straight, because if you miss, I am going to throw you off this roof." I took another step. "Do it!" I screamed. "Show my son what kind of man you are. Show him you are a killer." Julian wavered. The gun shook violently. He looked at me, then he looked at Leo. He looked at the drop below. He was crumbling. The pressure was too much. He was a bully, and bullies crumble when the victim doesn't flinch. I... Julian stammered. "I was 10 feet away. Give me the boy." "Julian," I said, dropping my voice to a command. "Give him to me. Now." Julian looked at the gun. He looked like he wanted to throw it away. He looked like he wanted to wake up from this nightmare. But then his eyes shifted past me, toward the entrance of the warehouse. Red and blue lights flooded the building. Sirens wailed, piercing the air. "Police. Drop the weapon." A SWAT team burst through the doors, weapons drawn. They moved with precise military speed. Miss Rodriguez had called them. She had tracked my phone. She knew I wouldn't wait. Julian panicked. The sound of the sirens snapped the last thread of his sanity. "No," he screamed. "You called them. You lied." He grabbed Leo. He pulled him toward the edge. He wasn't going to shoot me. He was going to jump, and he was going to take Leo with him. "No," I yelled. I lunged. I covered the 10 feet in a split second. I ignored the gun. I ignored the danger. I was a father. I slammed into Julian just as he lifted Leo over the rail. We hit the metal grating hard. The gun skittered away, falling over the edge and clattering onto the concrete below. Julian clawed at my face. He scratched my eyes. He bit my arm. He fought like a rat. But I was an iron worker. I had hands that could bend rebar. I grabbed him by the lapels of his coat. I slammed him against the railing. I pinned him there. "Leo," I shouted. "Run!" Leo scrambled away, crawling toward the stairs. I looked into Julian's eyes. They were wild, empty. "You lose," I whispered. Julian spat in my face. "Go to hell," he screamed. 2 SWAT officers rushed up the stairs. They grabbed Julian, pulling him off me. They threw him to the ground. "You have the right to remain silent," the officer shouted, cuffing his hands behind his back. Julian didn't remain silent. He screamed. He howled. "I am a Preston. You cannot touch me. My father owns this city. Get your hands off me. I will have your badge. I will have all of your badges." They dragged him away, kicking and screaming like a spoiled child having a tantrum. I sat up. I wiped the blood from my cheek. My chest was heaving. "Dad." Leo ran back to me. He threw his arms around my neck. He buried his face in my dirty, torn coat. I held him. I held him so tight I thought I might crush him. I rocked him back and forth on that cold metal catwalk. "I got you," I whispered, my voice breaking. "I got you, son." Down below, the Union men were cheering. They were raising their wrenches in the air. I looked down at them. Then I looked at the police taking Julian away. The war was over. The dragon was in chains. But as I held my shaking son, I looked out the warehouse window. The sun was setting over the harbor, turning the water blood red. Julian was gone, but William Preston was still out there, and he had just lost his son. A man who loses his son is capable of anything, even if he hated him. I kissed Leo's forehead. "Let us go home," I said. We walked down the stairs. The ironworkers parted to let us through, clapping me on the back, shaking my hand. I walked out into the cool evening air. I was alive. My son was alive. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I truly owned something. Not a building, not a deed. I owned my destiny. The fall of the House of Preston did not happen quietly. It happened with the violence of a skyscraper collapsing in slow motion. The arrest of Julian Preston at the Navy Yard was broadcast live on every news channel from Boston to Los Angeles. The image of the billionaire scion being dragged away in handcuffs, screaming like a madman, became the defining picture of the year. But the real destruction happened the next morning when the markets opened. Preston Development stock didn't just drop, it evaporated. The revelation that the CEO had kidnapped a child and attempted to burn down a building filled with low-income tenants turned the company into radioactive waste. Investors fled. Banks called in their loans. Construction sites across the city went silent as funding dried up instantly. I watched it all from the small living room of Ms. Rodriguez's mother is house. Leo was sitting on the floor playing with a new train set that the union guys had bought him. He was safe. That was the only thing that mattered. But karma wasn't finished yet. That afternoon, William Preston was sitting in his study, the same room where he had insulted my wife and called my son a mongrel. He was watching the news ticker destroy 50 years of his work. His phone was ringing off the hook. Senators he had bribed were returning his donations. Partners were disavowing him. The legacy he had sacrificed his own humanity to build was crumbling into dust. The maid found him an hour later. He was slumped over his mahogany desk, clutching a letter from the Securities and Exchange Commission. A massive stroke. He didn't die. That would have been too easy. He survived, but he was paralyzed on his right side and unable to speak. The man whose voice had commanded fear for half a century was now trapped in a prison of his own flesh, able to see and hear his empire falling, but unable to utter a single word to stop it. 2 weeks later, I walked back into the courtroom. It was different this time. There were no arrogant lawyers in $3,000 suits. The Preston legal team had resigned en masse, claiming non-payment. Julian was represented by a public defender, a young woman who looked terrified to be there. Julian wasn't there. He was being held without bail at the county jail, considered an extreme flight risk and a danger to the community. Judge Holloway looked different too. He looked humble. He knew the FBI was watching his every move, investigating his past rulings for the Prestons. He was eager to prove that justice was blind. Mr. Carter, the judge, said, his voice respectful. The court has reviewed the evidence, including the video footage from the rooftop and the Navy Yard. The facts are indisputable. He banged the gavel. I hereby rule in favor of the plaintiff, Deshaun Carter. The title to the property at 45 West 4th Street is fully restored to him, free of all liens and encumbrances. Furthermore, considering the malicious intent, the emotional distress, and the physical harm caused to a minor, I am awarding punitive damages. The judge paused. He looked at the empty defense table. The court orders the liquidation of Julian Preston as personal assets to pay Mr. Carter the sum of $5 million. I sat there stunned. $5 million. It was the exact number William Preston had offered me on the roof, the exact number I had torn up and thrown into the wind. I didn't smile. I didn't cheer. I just squeezed Ms. Rodriguez's hand. "Thank you," I whispered. We walked out of the courthouse. The press was waiting again, but I didn't stop. I had work to do. The money hit my account 3 days later. It was a surreal amount of zeros. For a man who had spent his life counting pennies to buy bread, looking at that balance felt like looking at a foreign language. "Deshaun, what are you going to do with it?" Ms. Rodriguez asked. "You can go anywhere. You can buy a villa in Italy. You can retire." I looked at Leo. He was sleeping in the back seat of my rental car. "I am not going anywhere," I said. "This is my city, and I have some shopping to do." A month later, the bank held a foreclosure auction for the Preston estate, Julian's mansion, the place where he had thrown my clothes into trash bags, the place where he had told me I was nothing. It was a cold, rainy morning. A few developers were there looking to buy the property and flip it. They arrived in luxury SUVs holding umbrellas. I arrived in my truck. I was wearing my work boots and a clean flannel shirt. The auctioneer started the bidding. 2 million, 2.5, 3 million. The developers were bidding cautiously. They knew the house had bad juju. They knew the history. 3.5 million, the auctioneer shouted, going once. 4 million, I said loud and clear. The developers turned around. They saw me, the old black man with the calloused hands. They knew who I was. They whispered among themselves. They put their paddles down. They didn't want to fight the man who had taken down the Prestons. "Sold," the auctioneer yelled, slamming his hammer. "To Mr. Deshaun Carter, I walked up to the podium. I wrote a check, a certified bank check. I took the keys. That afternoon, I drove to the mansion. I walked up the long driveway past the iron gates that used to be locked against me. I unlocked the massive front door. The house was empty. The bank had seized the furniture, the art, the expensive rugs. It was just a hollow shell of marble and gold leaf. I walked through the silent halls. I walked into the kitchen where the chef used to look at me with disdain. I walked into the library where Julian used to drink his scotch. It was cold. It felt dead. Leo ran in past me. His sneakers squeaked on the polished floor. "Dad!" he shouted, his voice echoing. "This place is huge. Are we going to live here?" I watched him run. I watched him slide on the floor in his socks, laughing. I looked at the cold walls. "No, son," I said. "We aren't going to live here. This place, it was built for people who hide from the world. We don't hide." "Then why did we buy it?" Leo asked, stopping in the middle of the grand staircase. I walked over to him. I sat down on the stairs. "We bought it to give it back," I said. The next day the trucks arrived, but they weren't moving trucks. They were construction trucks. My guys from the union, Big Marcus, Tony, Sal. They walked into the mansion looking around with wide eyes. "You bought the castle?" Deshaun Marcus said, whistling. "What is the plan, boss?" I unrolled a set of blueprints on the floor of the grand ballroom. "Tear it out," I said. Marcus looked confused. "Tear what out?" "Everything I said. The gold fixtures, the marble statues, the velvet curtains. Get rid of it all. I want this place open. I want light." I pointed to the blueprints. The ballroom becomes a gymnasium. The library becomes a computer lab. The servants' quarters become classrooms. The wine cellar becomes a music studio. Marcus grinned. "A community center, not just a community center," I said. "The Sarah Carter Academy for Boys. A place for kids who have nowhere else to go. Kids like Leo. Kids who need to know that they are worth more than the clothes on their back." We went to work. For the next 6 months, the Preston mansion was filled with the sound of hammers and saws. But this time, it wasn't the sound of destruction. It was the sound of transformation. We ripped out the gates. We planted a garden where the helipad used to be. We painted over the dreary gray walls with bright colors. And we rebuilt 45 West 4th Street too. We turned it into affordable housing just like Sarah wanted. But the mansion was the symbol. We took the symbol of their greed and turned it into a factory for hope. The day we opened the center, hundreds of people showed up. The 12 families from the building were there. The union guys were there. Ms. Rodriguez was there, standing next to the mayor, who was suddenly very eager to shake my hand. I cut the ribbon. Leo stood next to me holding the scissors. I looked at the sign above the door. Sarah's house. I knew she was watching. I knew she was smiling. But there was one last thing I had to do. One last ghost to lay to rest. The following Tuesday, I drove to the state penitentiary. It was a gray concrete fortress surrounded by razor wire, a place designed to break men. I went through security. I surrendered my phone, my keys, my belt. I walked into the visiting room. It was a long room divided by thick plexiglass. On one side, the free. On the other, the damned. I sat down in booth number 4. A few minutes later, the door on the other side opened. A guard let a man in. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit. His head was shaved. He looked 20 years older. His skin was sallow, his eyes sunken and dull. It was Julian. He sat down. He didn't pick up the phone at first. He just stared at me. He looked confused, as if he couldn't understand why I was there. I picked up the receiver. Slowly shaking, Julian picked up his. "Why are you here?" he rasped. His voice was a shadow of the arrogant roar I remembered. "Did you come to gloat? Did you come to show me your money?" I looked at him. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a profound sense of pity. "No, Julian," I said. "I didn't come to gloat." Then what? Julian spat. "Go ahead. Tell me you won. Tell me you took my house. I heard you bought it. I heard you are living in my bedroom." I shook my head. "I am not living in your house, Julian. I gave it away." He blinked. "What?" "I turned it into a school," I said. "A school for poor kids. The ballroom where you slapped your mother-in-law. It is a basketball court now. The office where you made me beg. It is a library where kids learn to read." Julian stared at me, mouth open. You ruined it." "I fixed it," I said. I leaned closer to the glass. "I came here to tell you one thing, Julian. just one thing. I paused, waiting for him to look me in the eye. He looked up. His eyes were filled with tears of impotent rage. What he whispered. I took a breath. I thought about the fire. I thought about the bridge. I thought about the check I tore up. You were right, I said softly. Julian frowned. Right about what? I leaned in until my breath fogged the glass. Fire purifies, I said. I hung up the phone. I stood up. I didn't look back. I walked out of the prison. I walked out into the sunlight. Behind me, I heard Julian slamming the receiver against the glass, screaming at a world that had finally stopped listening. I got into my truck. I checked the time. It was 3 p.m. School was out. Leo was waiting. I had a son to raise, and we had a lot of building left to do. It has been 2 years since the fire. 2 years since the gavel banged in that courtroom. 2 years since I walked out of a prison visitor room, leaving Julian screaming behind the glass. I stood on the sidewalk of 4th Street. The air was crisp, smelling of autumn leaves and fresh paint. I looked up. The building in front of me was no longer a blackened shell. It was beautiful. We had restored the red brick until it glowed in the afternoon sun. The windows were new, large, and energy efficient, but they kept the vintage charm of the original design. The front door was solid oak, polished to a shine that you could see your face in. Above the entrance, a modest bronze plaque read, Sarah S. Haven. I didn't name it that because I wanted credit. I named it that because she was the one who bought the bricks. She was the one who saw value where everyone else saw ruin. Hey, Dad, catch? I turned just in time to catch a football spiraling toward me. Leo was running across the small park we had built on the empty lot next door. He wasn't the shivering, terrified boy in the back seat of a Honda anymore. He was 12 years old now. He had grown 3 inches. His shoulders were broader, and his eyes were clear and bright. He was wearing work boots, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. Nice throw, son, I said, tossing the ball back. He laughed and ran back to the group of kids he was playing with. Some of them were from the building, others were from the neighborhood. A few were kids from the Sarah Carter Academy, the boys who used to be in gangs until we gave them tools and taught them how to build things. I watched him play. I watched him help a smaller boy who had tripped. I watched him high-five a kid who had dropped a pass, telling him it was okay. He had a spine of steel just like I wanted. But more importantly, he had his mother's heart. Mr. Carter. I turned to see Mrs. Higgins walking out of the front door. She was holding a tray of cookies. You better come inside, Deshawn, she scolded gently. The tenant association meeting is starting, and if you are late, Mr. Silva is going to eat all the snacks. I laughed. I am coming, Mrs. Higgins. I walked into the lobby. It was warm. It smelled of floor wax, and Mrs. Higgins is baking. On the wall framed behind glass was the original deed, the one with the date 2004, the one Julian had spat on. I kept it there as a reminder that even the dirtiest things can be cleaned. We didn't live in the penthouse. I rented Unit 1B on the ground floor right next to the office. It was small. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a living room. It was all we needed. I still drove a truck, a newer one, yes, with heated seats because my back wasn't getting any younger. But it was a work truck. It had scratches in the bed and mud on the tires. The $5 million sat in a trust fund for the building and the school. I took a salary, the same salary as the head of maintenance. We had enough to eat. We had heat. We had safety. What else does a man need? People ask me why I didn't move to the suburbs, why I didn't buy a yacht, why I didn't wear a Rolex. I told them I already had the most valuable things in the world. I had respect when I walked down the street. I had a son who looked at me with pride. And I had a clear conscience when I put my head on the pillow at night. William Preston had a mansion, but he was alone in it, trapped in his wheelchair, staring at walls that whispered his failures. Julian had a cell. I had a home. That evening after the meeting, Leo and I sat on the fire escape watching the sun go down over the city. The lights of the skyline flickered on. The Preston Tower was still there, looming in the distance, but it didn't look scary anymore. It just looked like a pile of glass. Dad, Leo asked quietly, "Yeah, son, do you think Mom can see the sign? The one over the door." I looked at the sky. The first star was appearing faint and white in the purple twilight. "I think she sees it, Leo. I think she sees everything." Leo leaned his head on my shoulder. "I miss her," he said. "I know. I miss her too. Every day. But it doesn't hurt as much as it used to, does it, Dad?" I put my arm around him. "No, son. It doesn't hurt as much. Because we aren't carrying the pain alone anymore. We built something out of it." We sat there in silence, listening to the sounds of the city. The sirens were distant. The laughter from the park was close. I closed my eyes. I could see Sarah. She wasn't sick. She wasn't sad. She was standing in the garden of the mansion we had reclaimed, wearing her painting smock, smiling at me. "You did good, Deshawn," she whispered in the wind. "You kept your promise." I opened my eyes. I looked at my hands. They were old, scarred. The burn mark on my palm from the lockbox had faded to a white line, a battle scar. I looked at Leo. "Come on, son," I said, standing up. "It is getting cold, and you have homework." Leo groaned, standing up. "Do I have to?" "Yes, you do. You are going to run this place one day. You need to know more than just how to hammer a nail. You need to know how to read the fine print, so nobody can ever trick you." Leo smiled. "Like Uncle Julian." I smiled back. "No, better than Uncle Julian, because you are going to be honest." We climbed back through the window into our warm-lit apartment. I paused for a second before closing the sash. I looked out at the street one last time. I saw a black sedan drive by slowly. It wasn't the FBI. It wasn't security. It was just a car. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was Deshawn Carter. I was a builder. I was a father. And I was the richest man in Boston, not because of what I had in the bank, but because of what I had right here. I pulled the window shut, locking out the cold. I walked into the kitchen where my son was opening his books. I started making dinner. Life was simple. Life was good. Life and the fire. The fire had burned away everything that didn't matter, leaving only the gold behind. Many people believe that inheritance is about money, mansions, or stocks. They are wrong. My story taught me that the greatest inheritance a father can leave his son is not a loaded bank account, but a spine of steel and a heart that knows its own worth. The Prestons had millions, yet they were spiritually bankrupt. I had nothing but a rusted car and my dignity, yet I was the richest man in the world because I had loyalty and truth. Remember, dignity is the only currency that never devalues, no matter how much the market crashes. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel. And I want to know, what would you have done if you were offered the $5 million? Would you have taken it, or would you have torn it up like Deshawn? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. See you in the next video.